Okay, welcome ladies and gentlemen to the planning committee being held at 6 p.m. on the 25th of June 2020. Obviously due to government guidance on social distancing, this planning committee is being held with social distancing in mind. We don't have members of the public in the gallery, but of course this is being streamed live on YouTube to allow developers, residents and any other interested parties to remotely watch this meeting. Like earlier on this month, I just want to take this opportunity to thank the officers for all their hard work to get this meeting up and running, and of course our officers and Councillor Potter who are remotely taking part in this meeting. Obviously, whilst this is being streamed live, an audio recording will be made available on the council's website within around about 5 working days of this meeting. Okay, so with that, we'll now open up the agenda. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Is there any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Churchman. There's no substitute in his place, and Councillor Potter is on Microsoft Teams.
Excellent, fantastic, thank you. Okay, all right, then that takes us on to the minutes of the last meeting held on the 8th of June 2020. Are we happy with the minutes? Have we had any questions? No. Next meeting for the remote reference. No, okay. The minutes of the meeting to be held now. All right then, excellent. Go on into item 3, items of urgent business. There are no items of urgent business. However, I did want to update the committee that we will be just taking a slight change in order, and the reason is the officers will be sitting where Chris is at the moment. So what we want to do is do those items first. Chris will be doing the first 2, Matt will be doing the second 2, and then Nadia will be doing the last 2. And the reason for that is obviously to minimise them moving around the chamber. So items 8 and 9 will be first. Items 11 and 12 will be the 3rd and 4th. And then that means item 10 will move down towards the back of the agenda, and that will be Nadia. Okay, you happy with that? Excellent, fantastic, thank you. Okay, item 4, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Okay, no declarations of interest. And declarations of receipt of any correspondence. I think it's been relatively quiet for the last couple of weeks. Has anyone received any phone calls or emails? No? It's a first. Excellent. All right then. Brilliant. Right, that then takes us on to planning appeals. Found it on page 5 to 18, and if you have any comments or queries, John can take those remotely. Do you have any questions on the appeals? Councillor Rice.
Chair, I don't know if this is the correct place to ask the question. Perhaps Lee can give us some guidance. Chapel St Mary Biggin Lane, there was a stop notice put on that lane, Lee, as you're probably well aware. When are we going to put the land back to what it was? Because the people there who are in situ, the travelling people, have ruined an RSPP site, if I'm correct. I was just asking whether, as a department, we were going to insist that they put it back together. Apparently they do this every year about this time, Chair, and you know, they take advantage of our good nature. I think that's a nice way of putting it, but perhaps Lee could update us.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So a stop notice and enforcement notice were served recently on the site that you refer to in Biggin Lane. The steps within the enforcement notice require the landowner to do certain things. Those steps were drafted in close liaison with the ecology specialists from Essex Wildlife Trust, from Natural England and from BugLife. So the environment was key to those steps within that notice. What it might be easier to do rather than rehearse the steps within the notice is to circulate that chair to members of the committee and to Councillor Rice, so we can see exactly what the steps are, and if there's any further questions coming from that, we can take them that way. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions to field on the appeals? No? Okay. Excellent. Well, that takes us on to the public address to the committee, item 7. That now allows us to discuss the 6 items that we have on the agenda this evening. Okay, so the first one, and that will be presented by Chris, is 19/01140/OUT into Lakeside, found on page 19 to 82. And Chris, if you'd be so kind as to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Apologies, slight technical problem with you. Okay, for those of you who are streaming remotely, we're just trying to fix a small IT issue at the moment. We'll be with you momentarily. Whilst we're there, I can see Councillor Potter has his hand up to speak. Councillor Potter, did you have any questions you wanted to ask whilst we're just sorting it out? Thank you. Councillor Potter, did you have any questions?
If anyone, I'm sorry about this, if anyone can hear me, I haven't heard anything for about 10 minutes.
Yeah, the same as Steve Lyons here, the same as Councillor Potter. I can't hear anything. I understand there's some kind of technical problems in the chamber, but I don't know for sure.
Apologies for that. Thank you, Chairman. Fix the PowerPoint issues now, so we can give the presentation. So this is the Into Lakeside planning application. I'll take you through this slideshow. Apologies, a bit small, but what that is the description of the development, and in summary, what this proposal for is for a renewal of the previous 2016 planning application, outline planning application, that is, with all matters reserved. There are some slight differences. So the history was the 2016 permission, and there was one before that back in 2011. So that slide before you shows the description of development. In short, it's for a northern extension that extends to the north of the existing shopping mall and to the northeast of the shopping mall, and to the southeast there's another extension and relocation of the bus station from where it is at the moment to the north of Debenhams to the southeast corner, so it's nearer the footbridge towards the railway station and would create a better transport hub. There are also pedestrian cycle improvements proposed through the application as well. And that slide shows the differences. So the bus station, as I say, is one thing that's is the same as before, but in terms of location, but it is actually a bigger bus station that's now being proposed. Whereas last time it was for about 8 bus stands, this one's for 13. And that's been subject of discussions throughout the planning application to improve the size of the bus station to meet the requirements of bus operators. And as I say, it's in a better location in regard to the footbridge, and the railway station is kind of a transport hub. There's no temporary bus station as a result that was previously proposed. That's no longer required. And the red line has been reduced in size because works that were originally proposed in the 2016 application, as well as being proposed in the application for the leisure extension to the west of the store, which is called the Quay, that has delivered the footpath and cycleway improvements to that part of the site.
There are some revisions to the 106 as well, and they're all detailed in the report and in the recommendation section. Some of that's mentioned there as the main changes. So just take you through the slide. So that's the location plan. This, as you can see, is 2 red lines. North is to the left of the side of the map where the mouse is shown. So he's looking at a different angle from north to south as you'd normally see on a map. But the next slide does show the kind of aerial photo of the site with the distinctive lake and the surroundings as well. Come back to the existing layout. So the areas highlighted are those areas that are subject of change through the proposal. So this is where the existing bus station is. You've got the existing Debenham store there, existing parts of the building there, which would all be subject to change. And this is the proposed layout. I should say all plans of this application, because it's an application with all matters reserved as an outline application, all plans are indicative. So what would happen is if we got an outline planning permission, the future planning applications that follow, called the reserved matters, would deal with matters of layout, scale, appearance, access and landscaping. They're the 5 reserved matters that are identified in the legislation. There is a lot of indicative information provided with this application to show how the development could look. So it gives us a much clearer picture in terms of what we're considering and what we're looking to approve in the future as part of this outline application. So these areas shown highlighted in the colours are where the proposed extensions are proposed. So you've got an extension directly to the north of the mall, so that's extending the mall. Some slides later will show that. And then extending out to the northeast corner and creating an outside kind of environment, a public street for pedestrian access to serve some additional units here. And obviously this is taking up the position of car parks 5 and part of all of car park 6 and part of car park 5. Therefore, obviously Lakeside don't want to lose parking from the development. There's about 12,500 parking spaces at Lakeside at present. So what they're looking to do on this section there is put a multi-storey car park that would bring up the parking to the levels it is at the moment. So that's 12,500 spaces. Obviously that has to be carefully phased through the development to ensure there's not significant loss of parking, although as it says in the report, the car parks are never full, and only on bank holidays and Christmas times are the overflow car parks, such as the one, car park 13 I think it is, in the corner near the lake, opened at those periods of times. Otherwise they are closed throughout much of the year. So coming on to the other parts of the proposal, this is where the proposed bus station is, so that will cover part of car park 3, and there's some smaller retail units, convenience stores or uses that are proposed there. Again, as I say, that's close to the footbridge that crosses the A126 to the railway station and to Chafford. There are some improvements to pedestrian routes, so there's some routes around here and on the northern side of that road, bringing further down to the western side of the shopping centre, and also on the southeast corner of the shopping centre, again providing a pedestrian route that doesn't exist at present to the roundabout junction, so it links up with the the western side of the store, where there is, as I mentioned, those improvements to the footpath along this section of the road next to the lake, which then lead into the key area where the new leisure development is now open and operational. So this indicative plan shows a bit more colour in terms of those uses and annotation, so it just shows that a bit more detailed. Turning on to the northern extension, so just looking at what's proposed there, so that's the aerial photo as it stands at the present, with the car parks and the layout as it is. And there's some photos to show how it looks from the ground, as we're sure we're familiar with the Lakeside Shopping Centre's car parks, Debenham's appearance, and some photos there as well. That's from the road to the north of the store, and that's looking across, zoomed in from the footbridge towards that part of the site where the extension would be proposed to the north. And there are some indicative layout plans. So the extension to the mall, so Debenhams is here at the moment, that would then be extended. A department store, whether it's Debenhams or another one, will be anchored at the top end of the building, adjacent to the road, replacement of the bus station. So that was level 1. So that's as you go into the shopping centre and down to the lower ground level. That level is the normal level as you're going from the car parks level. So that's level 2 internally. That shows the outside public areas in terms of the units and public spaces, and that's level 3. So that's another additional level that's not there at this part of the store, but obviously in the centre of the shopping centre there is that level 3 for the food court areas. Multi-storey car park is adjacent to near to the roundabout at the bottom of the spiral, and that is shown there on that plan. And then this shows a bit of an indicative landscaping that would be proposed. There's a bit more greenery introduced into the site than there is at present, and that's also obviously compensating what's also been introduced in terms of the key development on the leisure development on the western side of the store. And that's the sections to show the mall internally as the extension would be, the levels. So indicative massing, as I say, with the details are in terms of the actual design and not for determination at this present in time. This is just all matters reserved. So these details show what it could like. So there are height parameters, series of parameter plans, and this is an indicative massing diagram taken from the design and access statement. It also shows the one to the where the bus station is proposed as well, just for completeness. And that's a visualisation of how the extension could look. So that's if you were near car park 5, the store being there, the main entrance as it is at the moment, and if you were standing at the road, or car park 8 about to cross the dual carriageway road there, that's what you'd see occupying car park 6 as it stands with that part of the proposal. And as you were coming down the spiral, that's the vision you'll see. So that's the multi-storey car park. There was a service road there, and then that's that building we've just seen on the previous slide from a sketch position. Indicative indication of how internally the mall would look with that extension, and that's how it looks at present, as we're familiar with. So the bus station location, this is the southeast part of the store. So there's the footbridge I mentioned of the railway station. That's car park 3, which would be occupied by this bus station. So that displaced parking goes into the multi-storey. There's already that open piazza area there, and there's some photos to show the site in terms of what it looks like, and that's the good one taken for the footbridge to show where the proposal would be in terms of the bus station. This area would change as a result, but obviously we've got the benefit of the leisure scheme on the western side of the site, which has created a new public square, much larger and usable than this location, to compensate for the loss of that. And that's the indicative plans to show the layout. That's actually the previous bus station layout. So there's about 8 stands shown there, and in and out access. And then these buildings as a new an internal concourse, and then that leads to the footbridge. The new one, the proposed one through this application, is shown as follows: a much bigger area for the bus station, 13 bus stands, so that's increased, and that's indicative as was the previous one. But as we've got those details here now, what was part of the previous application was through the 106 funding to increase the bus station at a later time. That's no longer applicable because that's now being proposed with this application. So when it comes to future reserve matters to deal with the layout aspects of the development, this can be used as the indicative layout to follow suit, and that would be tied in with conditions so we can secure something of that size usable to all the bus companies and those accessing Lakeside. And that's a visualisation to show the bus station and some landscaping. Again, I'm just picking up on the footpath around the southwest, linking through, and this is the new path here through alongside the multi-storey. So the road changes there from, I think it's 4 lane at the moment to 2 lanes, one direction each for traffic movements, and that's the location of the bus station as well. And then some visualisations to show at the moment. So as you can see, it's not easy to walk around. There's no pedestrian route around there at moment. People do it, I've seen them do it, but you can walk around there, but obviously a formal footpath is much safer and a better way of doing that. So coming to the summary of the application, it is recommended for approval subject to conditions and the 106, the details in the recommendation section of the report. As I say, this proposal would lead to benefits in terms of new, additional and improved retail facilities and other commercial facilities in terms of food outlets, etc. and leisure uses. Would help maintain the position of Lakeside Shopping Centre as a regional centre in competition with other similar shopping centres in the area. Obviously economic benefits to the local area through business rates, but also employment opportunities for the construction and operational phase, as well as indirect employment. This is a high quality design, modern, sustainable extensions that are proposed. Obviously different to the shopping centre at the moment, which was built from the 1980s, but this modern approach, as we've seen with the extension to the leisure part of the development, clearly has visual improvement benefits to the appearance of the building. Creation of the transport hub, which ideally in a much better location now, the bus station and railway station linked together, nicked with the separation of the footbridge, and obviously they mentioned the improved pedestrian cycle links and the 106 package. The application is for approval subject to the details of the recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris, for that very detailed report there. Okay, looks incredibly exciting. We do have one speaker statement, but before we get there, I'd like to open up to questions. Do we have any questions for Chris? Councillor Fletcher, thank you.
Sorry about that, Chair. Completely forgot process. Yeah, Chris, the new location for the bus station is, as proposed, will be into or right by the roundabout, which is already at current traffic levels a bottleneck, to say the least, at rush hour times. At the moment, buses can avoid that roundabout and get out through the other exit. So, have they thought about how they're going to try and manage the extra traffic coming into that roundabout, given that it's already overloaded?
In terms of the planning application, there's a detailed transport assessment and a detailed section in the environmental statement of the planning application that's considered the impact of those changes. And as I say, there's been previous applications for the bus station in this location. It's a slightly bigger bus station that's proposed now, but again, that's to meet the needs of the operators from that point of view. That transport assessment has been through a detailed consultation process with the bus operators and our own highways officers as well. They don't raise any objections to the impact from the traffic movements of the bus station in this location in terms of the access point of view from that location. So there are no objections in terms of that.
Excellent. Yeah, no, very good point you raised there, Councillor Rice.
Yes, with this scheme, I very much welcome. We were told recently about the implementation of use-facing slips. I take it that this application is not dependent on those road improvements by Highways England.
That's correct. Obviously, as I mentioned, the site has history back to 2011 application, the 2016 application. Both those proposals were approved before east-facing slips consideration was even mentioned. It's more of a recent sort of thing. But this application, as proven with those previous ones, the more recent one as well, can stand on its own 2 feet in terms of that assessment from the transport assessment, and our highways officers have assessed that and said it's acceptable from that point of view. Obviously, the east-facing slips is something that in the future will lead to a benefit in the area, and they have better access to the east, coming from the east and leading to the east. And that's something that obviously is being worked through, but it's not ready at the present in terms of an application, and that's obviously going to be in the future, but it's not now. But we can obviously determine the application without that in terms of the highway impact, which is considered acceptable.
Just following on from that, Chair, obviously we're very excited about the employment opportunities. Can we be told how many jobs that will actually occur on this exciting development?
Of course. I think it was in one of the last slides, you may have missed it, but there was 3,700 jobs that would come, and that includes the construction process and then into the operational phase. So when it's a development that's built out, the uses, the staff that would be employed there. That also includes indirect staff, so those that may not be working at the shopping centre, but obviously wholesalers and that feed into the shopping centre as part of that process. So yeah, 3,700 jobs for the local area.
Just one final question, Chair. And with this exciting project and the 3,700 jobs, how long will this actually take to implement?
I'm not sure we've got exactly the details before us at present in terms of how that would implement. As I mentioned, there's a next stage to follow. So if we grant outline planning permission, there'll be future reserve matters to come forward. There is a condition in the recommendation that deals with a phasing plan. At the moment, we don't have full details of that phased arrangement, but the phasing plan will identify how long the build will take and how long those applications coming forward
I would think the vision is, unless it's stating that the statement within the next probably 5 years, I would think the store would come forward with these extensions.
Presumably, Chair, that level of detail could be, if we haven't got it to hand now, could be emailed to all the members.
Yes, that could, when it comes in, I mean, that's a part of a condition discharge. I'll just have a quick look in the report, just if there is something on this, just bear with me.
Yeah, I mean, while Chris is going through that, obviously you mentioned the east-facing slips. Yeah, it's just really disappointing that that wasn't installed 30 years ago. I think the council were made aware that there was a design flaw in not putting those east-facing slips in, but I think we are getting there. And the sooner they go in, the better. And in terms of construction, I think if you look back at the recent development of the bowling alley, Nickelodeon, etc., I was really impressed at how quickly that went ahead and how successful that was. So I think if that was anything to go by, just a high level of confidence that it will get done quite quick. And of course, retail has taken a bit of a kick in recently. I think shopping centres like this one all around the country, I think they're evolving very quickly to adapt to not just being retail outlets but being places of leisure. And I think the sooner they do that, the better. So yeah, some very good points you raised there. Chris, did you have anything there in terms of construction times?
Just checking still, Chair, just bear with me one moment. Unfortunately, there isn't any details about exactly when that phasing arrangement would happen. Obviously, it's a condition for the future in terms of the details of the phasing. But as I said, I think it's something that, as we've seen with the leisure scheme, all being well, that things will progress within the next 5 years. I mean, the planning consent would be for 5 years. They'd need to submit those reserve matters within that time, and then obviously construction on site soon after that.
The reason I asked that question, Chair, is the Prime Minister did say recently that he was looking for shovel-ready projects, and obviously that means to get it going as soon as possible, because we all know that employment in our economy will be a scarce resource, and we can see unemployment going up. So anything that can fill those gaps quickly would be welcomed.
Yes, very good points. Yeah, very good point you raised there. Okay, so with that, we'll now go on to the speaker's statement. Now, Wendy, obviously, as we're not allowed to have speakers in the chamber with us, you'll kindly read out the speaker's statement. And the first one would be, or the only one for this item, would be from a Matthew Nicholson, Into Properties applicant. Would you be so kind as to read out the report? Thank you.
So this statement is from Matthew Nicholson in support. Thank you for the opportunity to address members through the speaker's statement. We had hoped to meet and share our proposals with you prior to Planning Committee through a members' briefing session. This was not possible due to lockdown. We are very grateful for all the effort that has been made to convene this committee. A recent nationwide survey of our visitors has showed that many were keen to revert to pre-lockdown shopping and spending habits as soon as it was safe to do so. It was therefore fantastic to safely welcome back our visitors to Into Lakeside last week. Despite the challenges in the retail sector, Into Lakeside has continued to thrive and plays an important role in the local economy. A research study we completed recently highlights the value of physical stores despite the rise of online shopping. The research shows that £8 out of every £10 spent in 2025 will still be influenced in some way by a physical store. We firmly believe that Into Lakeside will continue to be a success despite the current challenges. The application before this committee is the renewal of a planning permission granted previously by the council in 2016 and 2013. As you will be aware, our most recent focus has been on the delivery of our fantastic £75 million leisure scheme. We want to continue to position Into Lakeside for the future and build on the success of the leisure scheme and the multi-billion-pound refurbishment of the rest of the centre, which has been undertaken in immediate priority is to support the safe reopening of the entire retail and leisure offer as the lockdown restrictions continue to ease. The current planning application proposal is substantially the same design-wise as the two previous proposals granted permission, although we expect the future occupiers might be different than we previously anticipated. The current proposal includes a larger and improved bus station design. Our latest plans include a safer drive-in, drive-out configuration preferred by the bus operators and an increase in the number of bus stands from 8 to 13, allowing space for future expansion of services from the outset. The leisure development delivered a new lakeside pedestrian and cycle path to the east of the lake, connecting the hotel with the boardwalk. Further improvements around the northern end of the lake are now included in the current proposal to complete the network of pedestrian and cycle routes around the shopping centre and lake. We will therefore be bringing forward very substantial improvements to public realm as part of this proposal. These improvements will encourage more visits to and movements around the basin to be made by modes other than the car. The committee report before you tonight is a thorough assessment of the proposals, and we welcome your officer's recommendation that outline planning permission should be granted. When combined with the leisure scheme, these developments and the associated infrastructure and public transport improvements will go a significant way to meeting the core strategy's long-held aspiration of transforming the northern part of Lakeside Basin into a new regional centre. We hope that you will continue to support our plans for Into Lakeside and follow your officer's recommendation and resolve to grant planning permission tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, Wendy, for that statement. Okay then, so we'll now go into debate. I'll start. So obviously, without repeating what I said a few moments ago, I think ultimately they're very right to comment on how fantastic that £75 million leisure scheme was and the success of that. I understand that retail has taken a bit of a kicking from online outlets, but actually my own personal preference, and I do agree with that statement, is that people are still vastly going to want to go shopping. It's not just about shopping, it's going out to have something to eat, it's something to do, and ultimately, certainly when it comes to clothes shopping, for me, it's always best to actually, see what you're buying in front of you. So I'm incredibly encouraged by this proposal. I think it's going to be a huge success for Lakeside. It's Lakeside evolving. And I think what's also really good about this particular development is that there is that commitment to keep those parking spaces at the number they currently are. That's incredibly important because whilst petrol and diesel cars are being phased out, electric cars are here and they will be on mass development within the next few years. And people are still going to want to go to Lakeside in a vehicle. Albeit public transport is also another viable option. So it's really good to see that commitment's there, and of course it is still free to park. I think that's incredibly important. But ultimately, really encouraged by this, and if the last one's anything to go by, hopefully it will get delivered as soon as possible. I don't have anything else to add. Councillor Rice, thank you.
I would certainly second what you're saying. It's important because Lakeside was opened around 1990. It's been in operation now for over 30 years. It's very good. There obviously has been a shift towards leisure, and it's right and proper that this applicant has recognised that, so that people can enjoy Lakeside. It's a big employer. We do wish it success. Obviously, we'd like the government to fund the east-facing slips sooner rather than later, because that will take pressure off our local road network, which is important. But with 3,700 new jobs, it's a very exciting proposal. As the Prime Minister only said recently, he is looking for shovel-ready projects. And the reason why he's looking for shovel-ready projects is so that we can get people back to work, and that's very important. But I would commend it.
Yeah, excellent. I concur with that statement. I think was it oven ready or shovel ready? I thought it was oven ready, but okay. Either way, I get the point. Did anyone else want to comment before we go to the vote? No. Okay. All right then. Well, there is a recommendation on page 52. Let's go there now. It's, page 52, that's 8.1, and that's approved subject the following conditions. I'm happy to recommend that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Rice. Okay. And if we're happy, we'll now go to the vote. So all those in favour of recommendation for approval, please raise your hands. Okay. And as Councillor Potter is working remotely, Wendy, did you want to establish a vote there? Thank you. Oh, hello, Councillor Potter. We're just going to the vote, which is a recommendation for approval on the application at Lakeside. Are you in agreement with that?
Well, I've got a problem actually. I've had my hand up on the screen for over 40 minutes trying to tell you that I can't hear what anyone's saying. So would it be legal for me to vote on this? I haven't heard, I can hear you. It just sounds like everyone's mumbling. I know you're not, but I haven't had any articulation received from any of the speakers. So is it okay for me to vote?
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Potter. Yeah, I'm all right to carry on for a moment. Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Potter. Apologies, we did see that you had your hand up. And we did try to make contact, but yeah, leave that with me because we've gone to the vote, and generally it's unanimous, but obviously we want to make sure that we do that correctly. So I'll just have a quick word with Lee and Wendy, and we'll come back to you. But ultimately, I'm sure we can get to the bottom of that. Just hold for 1 moment. Yeah, thank you for those comments there, Lee. Basically, what Lee's suggesting is we need to speak to legal and just grab their advice. But it's probably best in this situation that that you don't vote. Legal, would you like to come in there and advise? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in a way that it is, I think you're right there, because Councillor Potter, if he's not been able to hear anything, you know, it's almost like he wasn't there. Well, he wasn't there really, was he? So unfortunately, that does sound, you know, there is a problem there, and hopefully this won't affect the vote in this case. But I agree that perhaps, you know, it ought to be treated like, you know, he's not there. And maybe perhaps the techies could have a look and see if they can do something about that sound for him, or has some suggestions for the next one. Is that okay?
That's absolutely fine. Thank you very much for that advice, and obviously apologies to everyone who's in the chamber and watching from home.
Well, if I can hear all right.
This is new technology. I think we're getting there very
hello.
slowly.
If anyone can hear me, I just heard the lady speaking perfectly.
So with respect,
It's the people in the chamber I cannot hear.
Wouldn't have counted. Councillor Potter, would you like to come in there? Councillor Potter, was you making contact there?
Yeah, I was just saying that I could hear the lady that just spoke and gave you legal advice. I could hear her perfectly. I can't really hear anybody in the chamber.
Okay, all right then. Well, what we're going to do then, Councillor Potter, is we will, for the moment, we're going to approve this particular application, and then we'll have a very short recess in order to sort out any of the sound issues. Lee, do you concur with that? Brilliant. Okay, so what we'll do, to avoid any doubt, what we'll do, we'll go to the vote again with Councillor Potter not included, and then once we've established a vote, we will then allow technical to speak with Councillor Potter, and we'll take it from there. Sorry, Councillor Fletcher, you had your hand up, and then Councillor Rice. Cheers.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, all I was going to suggest was once we move into, just as a purely matter of courtesy, once we move into the next item, if we can check with Councillor Potter straight off that he can actually hear what's going on before we proceed.
Yeah, very good point there, Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Rice.
All I was going to suggest, Chair, is that Councillor Potter would have had the agenda in front of him and he would have fully read it. So he should be entitled to vote, even though he's not heard the officers, you know, debriefing. And what I was going to suggest in future, so we can expedite things, is when we put up the documents on the television up there, we actually circulate those ahead of the meeting, so that instead of an officer having to go through page by page, members would have an opportunity to have read it before the meeting. And so when the officer is presenting, it can be sharper so that people can pick up on it. But I would have assumed myself that Councillor Potter would have read the agenda and should be allowed to vote, even though he hasn't heard the synopsis from the officer.
Yeah, okay, well, I think they're very good ideas, very good suggestions, certainly things that we can take forward. I think ultimately, when you look at some of the planning rules that we have here, they're incredibly archaic. I know in the past we've had, you know, if you don't turn up for the first minute of the presentation, that's it, you're out. And I think what's happened is obviously we've had the current pandemic, the rules are very old-fashioned, we've obviously moved on in time, and I think there's just a little bit of a clash between very old-fashioned rules and modern-day technology. So I think going forward, that's certainly something that we should pick up. I do agree with Legal and Lee on this one. Ultimately, the rules are there, and if he hasn't heard the presentation, then ultimately, unfortunately, he won't be able to vote. I think we've got a little bit lucky there, because I think that this is an application that ultimately, when you look at the vote, it was pretty much unanimous, and that vote wouldn't have been a problem. Had it been something a little bit more closer, then yeah, it would have been a massive own goal. But look, these things happen. I'm sure we will get to the bottom of them. I mean, ultimately, once everything's clear, everyone will be back in this chamber in time.
One further suggestion is that if this was to happen on the next item, Councillor Potter couldn't hear anyone, couldn't hear the officer, then at the end of the item, I think the officer would have to reintroduce the item just for Councillor Potter, because his coming live streaming, it's very important that he's engaged in this process. So I think that would be a way forward, Chair.
Yeah, well, 100%, I agree with you on that one. What we can do, as I said, we'll have a short recess. We'll check to make sure Councillor Potter can hear us. And obviously, as the next items go through, we could probably intermittently check. Obviously, Councillor Potter's going to want to ask some questions. He does have the link there to show us that he wants to speak. So what we'll do, we'll keep an eye on that like a hawk. And you know, every time that reference is shown, we'll go straight to Councillor Potter as not to lose any time. So what we'll do, Lee, if you're happy, we'll go to the revote. Is that okay? All right. So as mentioned, the application reference 19/0114 0/OUT is recommendation for approval. Is that seconded, Councillor Rice? Brilliant. And then all those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay, so that is unanimous approval across the committee members that are present, with the exception of Councillor Potter. And with that, we can say that that application has been approved. Excellent. So that now takes us on to the next item. But before we do, we'll check in with Councillor Potter, IT and Democratic Service to make sure everything is running smoothly. Okay, over to yourself, Wendy. Okay, thank you. Just speaking with Democratic Service, what we've got to do, we've just got to disconnect the connection and reconnect with the members. Wendy, are you happy with that? Are you happy to make the disconnection? Yeah. Okay. Just bear with us for a moment, Councillor Potter. We'll have you back with us in no time. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Potter, we've just re-established a connection. Can you hear me clearly now? Councillor Potter, can you hear me? Caroline, just to establish a connection, can you hear me from your remote location?
Yes, it does sound there's something very squeaky going on in the background. But yes, I can hear you all right, actually. One of the things that I did wonder, if Councillor Potter can get YouTube on a different device, he could listen to it through YouTube, couldn't he? Might that help with the sound if it comes on as a big problem?
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting suggestion. We'll see if that's workable. I think first of all we need to establish a connection with Councillor Potter. Councillor Potter, can you hear us?
I mean, Chair, I was just going to suggest, if we can't establish a link with Councillor Potter, we have to abandon the meeting and come back another time.
Yeah, well, let's before we're there, let's try and work out if something can be established. We'll take it from there.
Because the other thing, Chair, is Councillor Potter, he finishes his shielding at the end of this month, so he's then available to come in to a meeting like this. So, we must bear that in mind.
Yeah, let me. Wendy, did you have anything to add there? It might be. Is there a break between myself, yourself, and pressing the body button?
Oh, can anyone hear me?
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, I can hear you, Councillor Potter.
Oh, thank you. I can hear you really well, actually. And I just heard Councillor Rice talking. I could just hear talking, and the only word I picked up was Potter. So it's only, I'm not accusing anyone of mumbling, but to me that's what it sounds like in the chamber. But I can hear you perfectly well and really loud. So
Hello, Councillor Potter, can you hear me?
My equipment.
Councillor Potter, can you hear me? Steve Lyons.
Yes. Yeah,
Yes, I can hear you and I can hear Caroline. I'm struggling to hear the council chamber too.
Yeah, it's the chamber.
I'm exactly the same as yourself.
I don't think
it
fair
isn't
for
your
people to
machine.
vote when they can't hear what's being said.
No, I'm struggling to hear too.
It's exactly my problem. Yeah.
I sound exactly the same.
If they can't sort it out reasonably soon, I can't see the point of me continuing with the meeting. It would be just me looking at pictures and hearing the odd mumble.
Councillor Potter, do you want to try leaving the meeting and then rejoining, if you can hear me? Can you hear me?
Pardon?
Councillor Potter, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Wendy suggested leaving the meeting and rejoining.
Yeah, how do I do that?
Well, you would hang up and then join in the same way as you did before.
Yeah, so what button do I press on my screen?
There's a telephone, there's a red telephone. Well, there's a red with a telephone. That should take you out.
Okay, I'll try that. Thank you.
Councillor Potter, can you give us an indication if you can hear us, please, and unmute your mic? Thank you.
Councillor Potter, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can always hear you perfectly.
So you're still at the meeting. Did you leave or did
Yeah,
you?
someone excluded me from the meeting and rejoined me. I don't know. It was someone called WL.
Wendy Lee, that's Wendy.
Yeah,
That
she
was
must have
me.
excluded me and rejoined me.
I just removed you and then added
Yeah.
you back in the hope that this will work. So can you hear us now?
It's extremely vague. I can't pick out the words that people are saying that are in the chamber, but I can hear perfectly well people that are not in the chamber.
Steve's fine. Can you hear me?
Is anyone else having the same problem where you can't hear us in the chamber?
You're very quiet to me, yes. I can hear Councillor Potter and I can hear Caroline perfectly well, but you're coming across very quiet.
I can hear everybody.
Maybe try turning up your volume to see if that might work.
How do you do that?
I've already done that, Wendy. I'm at full volume.
Okay, right. So obviously, look, these things happen from time to time. I understand what Councillor Rice is saying. I think you are right, but ultimately we shouldn't really bar somebody from being able to take part. However, speaking to legal and Lee, what I as chair am going to do, I'm going to allow Councillor Potter to make that decision, so he can voluntarily remove himself from the meeting and we carry on, or if he is 100% his decision. If he wants us to adjourn this meeting and start another time, we can. I am conscious. The reason we're having this meeting, Councillor Rice, is because there is a huge backlog. I mean, this is the second meeting this month, so that was the general purpose of that. But I'm 100% happy to do whatever Councillor Potter does. Now, obviously, we've got to establish that contact and take it from there. Councillor Potter, can you hear me? Councillor Potter, can you hear me?
Yeah, just about. I can hear the odd word. I heard my name mentioned.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, Councillor Potter, what I'm going to do is, obviously you're having much difficulty hearing. What I'm going to do, I want to give you the option here to voluntarily remove yourself from the meeting, or if you would like to take part in the remaining items, what I'm going to do, I'm going to adjourn the meeting for a later date, and you are 100% at your own will to make that decision. I will support whatever you decide here. What would you like to do? Would you like us to come back another day to discuss these items, or would you like to voluntarily remove yourself? Thank you.
Oh, crikey, that's a difficult one.
Yeah, I know
don't
it's a difficult one, so take your time, have a little think. But as I said, you are 100%. This is your decision, and I will 100% support whatever you decide. Thank you.
Oh, I think I better remove myself from the meeting voluntarily.
Sorry, Councillor Potter, can you repeat that?
I think I shall remove myself from this meeting voluntarily.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Councillor Potter. I do apologise, but obviously we will get to the bottom of that. All right, thank you very much for your participation.
Thanks. I apologise to all the people I've caused this delay.
No, it's not your fault. It's obviously an issue our end, and one we'll get to the bottom of it. Okay.
Thank you.
In fairness, you've asked Councillor Potter to make a decision, but I think, in fairness, the meeting should be adjourned because he can't hear us. So there obviously is a point. There's a problem there. If we adjourn the meeting, Councillor Potter can join us within a week to 10 days' time because he'll be finished shielding. And I think we should do that, Chair, because I think it's wrong that we exclude a member. Even though it's voluntary, it's wrong. And I think we should abandon this meeting now. And if necessary, put it to a vote, you know.
Okay, yeah, no, that is, you know, as I said, the whole point of planning is to grab other people's views and opinions. I'll be honest with you, this is an incredibly difficult one. It wasn't a comfortable conversation I just had with Councillor Potter. What I'll do, because obviously Councillor Potter is now gone voluntarily, so that he's no longer part of that. Just before we go any further, it might be worth hearing from a few other ideas, opinions. So Councillor Shinnick, Councillor Lawrence, and then I'll bring Lee and Legal in just to establish where we are. Thank you.
I think we ought to abandon it because one of the officers on there said he can't hear us either, didn't he? You can hear the other people on the screen, but not us in the chamber.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Lawrence.
I'm not sure if Councillor Potter realises that because you won't be voting on this, if anything come back next time, you won't be able to vote on any of the next meeting either, would you?
Only if it was sent to site visit. But yeah, actually speaking, you are correct. Yeah. Okay, all very interesting points. Let me just pick up with Lee Nicholson briefly. Then we'll chat with legal. We'll see where we are, and if maybe we end up going to a vote as chair. It may be I decide that we carry on, but we'll see. Let's see where we are. So just give us a couple of minutes and we'll be with you. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Anything coming out? We're testing this on YouTube. Shall I try again? Yeah? Everyone, please bear with us.
We're going to put the land back to relocation of the bus station from where it is at the moment.
Everyone, please bear with us.
Okay, I just had an extensive chat with Lee. Look, this is not easy. This is tough stuff. We've spoke to the officer. There's only one officer that can't hear currently, or is having difficulty hearing. That's a member of Highways, and we do have other members of Highways available. Look, ultimately, as chair, these things come down to me. It is a power that you do have, and it is my will that we do crack on. The reason I want that is because we've potentially got 8 items on the next agenda. If we add the other 5, we're going to be looking at sort of upwards of 12, 13 items. So look, ultimately as chair, my decision is that we crack on. I've heard what you're saying. Ultimately, that decision lies with me. Now, I do appreciate that's contrary to what some of you want. I apologise for that, but yeah, I want to carry on. So unless anyone's just got anything to say, we then moved on to the next item.
I'm not being awkward, Chair, but we've excluded one member, which is unfortunate.
I don't think we've excluded him. What we've done, we've offered him voluntarily the option to leave. But he had, and he would have been 110% supported had he decided to adjourn the meeting.
The reality is we have excluded him, even though it's voluntarily. So we have a problem. We have an officer that can't hear also. So I would suggest that we should abandon this meeting. If necessary, put it to the vote. Ask people what they feel. But I don't think it's safe now because we've excluded a member. That is wrong. And because of the IT difficulties, and we know there are problems with this system, I personally feel we should abandon the meeting and we should, with Councillor Potter, he'll be free from shielding within a very short time and we can re-adjourn this meeting at that time. Then he can fully participate. It's unfortunate, but I think that's where we should be. And if we have to call a separate meeting, then we should do so, because I think it would be unsafe excluding a member on any decisions we come to.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, ultimately, when I've had the conversation with the officers, that has been sought after legal advice. So I understand where you're coming from. You said it's an exclusion. I'm on a slightly different page. I don't think it's an exclusion as such. It really just comes down to a difference of opinion. As chair, I've made a decision that we carry on, and I appreciate that you think we should put it to the vote, but the decision is with me as I'm the chair, and as such, that decision is final. Now, we've got full council coming up. If you feel that I've overstepped the mark, then obviously there are chances. But we're on separate pages here, and ultimately, when you're on a separate page, same. But as I said, I gave him that opportunity, and he's voluntarily removed himself.
All I can say, Chair, and to be fair, I can move as a member that we abandon this meeting. And if someone wishes to second it,
you can call it voluntary exclusion. You've voluntarily left. Voluntarily left, and legal will give it the green light. But let me just double check with Lee, because obviously I was on the if you want to move that, then let me see. Okay, Councillor, I think you might need to bring democratic services in here, but my current understanding is you're well within your right to move the motion of abandonment. You need good reason to do so. Remind me, I don't think that reason exists on the basis of voluntarily removed himself, but I'll hand it over to you and you can take it from there.
I hear what you say, Chair, but at the end of the day, whether Councillor Potter said he'll voluntarily exclude himself, in effect, he's been excluded. Now, as a democratic elected member of this committee, I feel that he's coming to the end of his shielding. It would be quite right and proper to abandon this meeting for a later date where he can fully participate in this meeting. So I would so move, and I'd hope one of my colleagues would second that motion, put it to a vote. People are minded to say we'll abandon it, that's fine. If they say no, we agree with the chair, which is good self, then we go with that. But I think that's a fair reason for actually putting that motion. We've effectively excluded, even though it's voluntarily, it is excluded a member, which cannot be right. You know, and someone could turn around and say that some decisions might be unsafe. They could say that, you see. For the benefit of that, I think we should move to the motion, have a vote. If people vote for it, we say yes, okay. People say no, then we move forward that way.
Okay, yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I mean, look, in terms of unsafe decisions, we can face this every month. Landing Hill's not an unsafe decision. I understand it's passed to the monitoring officer, whether it gets called in or not, I don't know. Just before I go any further, Councillor Byrne, you raise your hands. Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that. Thank you very much. Well, look, as I said, we're on separate pages here. Democratic Services, Wendy. Obviously, Councillor Rice has moved the motion there. Do you have any comments on that? Obviously, he wants to adjourn. Only the chair can adjourn unless there's a good reason from a member. Whereabouts are you on that? I'm happy with whatever you decide. Thank you.
The decision to adjourn the meeting does lie with the chair. You can adjourn a debate, but there's not a debate on the item at the moment. That makes sense.
Okay. So again, I mean, I'm not sure if we're back where we was 10 minutes ago. I'm saying that we continue. I'm aware of the risks that are involved in that.
It's no challenge to your authority, none whatsoever. I just think we should take it to a vote. If people say yes or no, we respect that decision and move on.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher, you raise your hand. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, we've now lost about half an hour of debate in debating whether we should carry on debating or not. I would suggest that my suggestion is that we move to the next item. If we find that we are still hampered by this problem, then we make a decision.
Okay. Is anything else to add, Lee? Did you have anything else to add there? No? Okay, so as it stands, I'd like to carry on with the meeting. We'll see how it goes. Unless anyone else had anything else to say, that's my final decision.
Chair, what you should do is ask the other members how they feel. Don't ask me. Mike's had his say. You've had yours. Ask the other members how they feel.
But as I said, I'm the chair, and the decision lies with me. So, statistically, I only need 3 people to continue this meeting. So I've that's myself. Councillor Fletcher's happy to continue. Councillor Burns happy to continue. That's the numbers. Well, if the others want to express an opinion, that's fine, but it still doesn't change the fact that as chair, I want to continue the meeting. I've heard what members have said.
It comes back to one fundamental thing. We have excluded a member.
We've not excluded a member. He's voluntarily removed himself from the meeting.
Well, with respect, we have, and you know, we have to recognise it's a direct result of a failing IT system. You know, whether we like it or not, because we've even got officers there now cannot hear us.
That's not true.
Well, no, the officer said it.
Well, we've discussed that, and it's the one officer is a member of the highways team, and we've got other members all have confirmed they're okay. Look, I've got to draw a line under this. My decision's fine, and I'd like to move on. Excellent, thank you. Okay, right, so thank you for that. This stuff's tough, it's not easy. Let's crack on. And with that, we go on to the second item on the agenda this evening, which is item 9. That's 20/00408/FUL, Manor View, Southend Road, found on pages 83 to 100, and that's Chris, if you'd like to present that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is Manor View, Southend Road, Corringham. So this is a planning application seeking planning permission for use of the land for 4-pitch gypsy traveller site with a layout comprising of 6 mobile homes, 2 touring caravans, 1 day room and a static caravan to be used as a day room. The site presently has planning permission which was allowed on appeal for 5 years, and that expires in July the 16th, 2020. The appeal allowed for a change of use to 4 pitches for gypsy traveller residential site involving the development of 3 day rooms, a stable block, siting of up to 8 caravans, of which no more than 4 would be mobile homes. The appeal was allowed, and the inspector took into account the personal circumstances of the applicant's position at that time in granting a temporary planning permission. So this is the red line that shows the site on the northwest side of Southend Road. As you can see, the site is in a rural area, not far off from the Five Bells roundabout interchange. There is a cottage house to the western boundary, and there's some other houses along the road as well. But generally, the site is surrounded by fields to the north and east, and the site sits within the metropolitan green belt. And that shows it a bit clearer in terms of the aerial photo. The site is there in the middle of the screen, and you can make out the A13 just to the north of that. So that was the plan as approved. There's the 4 pitches and shows what is allocated on the site at present, and that is the proposed plan in terms of the differences. And the differences being this is an application for full planning permission for permanent permission, not a temporary one. So it is different to the previous application that was allowed on appeal. And here we've got some photos of the site. So that's looking out of the access towards Southend Road. And then that's looking at plot 4, which is towards the eastern part of the site, looking to the northwest with 2 plots shown in that location. And that's another plot, plot 1. The application has been assessed in terms of the greenbelt and all material planning considerations. That summary provides a summary of what the application is for. taking into account all the considerations, the proposal is considered unacceptable for the impact upon the green belt. As the assessment explains, it is defined as inappropriate development within the green belt, which is by definition harmful and would lead to a loss of openness and the rural character as this development. It would have an urbanising impact as well. The applicants put forward 3 very special circumstances, but having considered those and in the balancing weighting arrangement, as explained in the table within the report, the balance is favouring the planning policy position that inappropriate development and the loss of the openness is outweighing the very special circumstances in this case, and that the recommendation is for refusal for that reason as set out in the recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Fantastic, thank you very much. That takes us to questions. Any questions? Councillor Rice.
Yes, Chair. If we were mindful to refuse this application, how would we remove these travellers from the said site?
What would follow is obviously the planning permission for the temporary use expiring on the 16th of July. The council would then have to look to serve an enforcement notice requiring them to remove from the site, and the steps required within that notice would be for them to vacate the land and restore it to its previous use. Obviously that leaves a requirement for those people to go somewhere else. We'd obviously be working with them in terms of liaising with them to see if there's an alternative location for them to go from that point of view.
Would I be correct in saying that if we refuse this and the applicant took it to appeal, then it's virtually frozen in limbo?
Generally, if there was the planning permission refused and that there was an appeal submitted, then we would be waiting the outcome of that appeal decision before we took any enforcement action. We could still serve an enforcement notice, and there's obviously a right of appeal to that as well. And it may be the inspector considers the enforcement notice and a refusal of planning permission at the same time, which is very common. And that might be the position if there was an appeal in terms of that.
And can you just tell us what's the average appeal decision through the inspector at the moment? Is it 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? I don't know.
I think it's around about 12 months from when the appeal is lodged to a decision time. There may be a bit of backlog in terms of lockdown at the moment, but I think that's what we're working towards at present from what we gather from the planning inspectorate.
So in effect, we'd be giving them a 12-month temporary permission.
If they appeal, but if we serve the enforcement notice as well and the inspector considered that, the outcomes of that appeal, if the appeal's dismissed and the enforcement notice is upheld, there'll be a remedy at that point after the appeal decision that may be that they would vacate the land within a set period of time, which is what that notice would say as from that appeal decision, unless the inspector allowed it for any reason. Then obviously things would be different, and it depends what those conditions were if we decided to allow planning permission for it.
Excellent. Okay, Councillor Fletcher.
Totally take Councillor Rice's point, and we may need to manage the expectations of particularly the neighbours who've objected here. Presumably, if we didn't follow the advice of the planning team and we didn't refuse this, as I understand it, the original decision to allow it was only on a temporary basis. Presumably, if we refuse to refuse, we are starting to turn the handle towards it becoming a permanent placement, aren't we? It starts off as temporary, and then we decline to refuse it. Presumably, that's pushing it on the way to becoming permanent.
Well, if you didn't want to refuse it, then we'd have to look at the grounds for why you want to approve it, and you'd have to then consider whether you wanted to consider it as the application is for a permanent permission, so that's what we should be determining. Instead of issuing another temporary, we should be looking at whether we can permanently allow this from that point of view. But as I say, it's recommended for refusal.
So either way, I suppose what I'm saying is either way, the likelihood of immediately having the current occupants leaving there is quite narrow. If
there's an appeal against any refusal of planning permission, it could be a year in time. But as I say, we could still look to serve an enforcement notice. So if that appeal decision is then determined within a year's time or less than that, and that enforcement notice is upheld, requirements of that notice would take effect immediately, and therefore the steps required for them to move from the site would therefore take place.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rice.
On page 95, 6.36, the council acknowledges the present lack of a 5-year supply for gypsy and traveller sites. Now, within that statement there, and obviously the next statement by the inspector, where he has previously afforded the matter of unmet need significant weight, even though it was just for a temporary permission, how much weight are we actually putting on this?
The table on page 96 identifies the weighting applied to the factors promoted as very special circumstances. Unmet need is given significant weight, so that's consistent with the appeal decision. What I would add in terms of that part of the assessment, the earlier paragraph 6.32 and 6.33 recognises the need for traveller and gypsy pitches within the borough, but that would be addressed through the new local plan process, is how we look to identify those sites moving forward.
Okay, thank you. All right, so with that, if there are no additional questions, we'll go on to the two speaker statements, which Wendy will kindly read out. The first is a statement of objection, and that's from Mr. and Mrs. Gunson, who are residents in the area. Wendy, if you so kind to read that, thank you.
We live at Willow Cottage, which is the immediately adjacent house to the site and therefore the most affected by the existing development. We were very concerned about this gypsy and traveller site when an application was first made in January 2014 and refused permission in March 2014. As committee members are aware, it is government policy to regard gypsy and traveller sites as inappropriate development in the Green Belt. Permission was granted by the appeal inspector in July 2015 for 5 years only because very special circumstances were made out, including that it was a proposal for temporary use. Strict conditions were imposed. Unfortunately, our concerns as to the effect on our living conditions have been shown to be justified. We would ask the committee to give careful consideration to the following points. As a matter of planning policy principle, this is the wrong place for a gypsy and traveller site. This use is not appropriate in the Green Belt, but if there are proven very special circumstances, these sites should not be immediately adjacent to members of the settled community. Harmful conflicts of lifestyles are very likely. The impact on us has been harmful. We have experienced nuisance caused by dogs barking and disturbing our sleep, generators running all night, fires burning while we are in our garden, drainage difficulties, flooding of our property. A condition in the inspector's decision was not complied with and has not been enforced. The Ombudsman finding refers. We have suffered leakage of sewage into our garden and onto our driveway because the arrangements on the site do not work effectively. We would add that the occupancy condition imposed by the inspector was not complied with. This has been verified by planning enforcement inquiries. Further, the intended dense landscape buffer between the site and Willow Cottage was not properly carried out. A consequence of the above is that Mrs. Gunson has developed a stress disorder.
Fantastic, thank you, Wendy, and that then takes us on to the next speaker statement, which is a statement of support. That's Brian Woods, and he's the agent. If you can take time to read that, thank you.
I refer to the above and to the objection statement in connection with the above. It is requested that this response is read. As the objector points out, the appeal was allowed granting a 5-year temporary permission because of a lack of deliverable sites and the very special circumstances that existed at the time. Today, there is still a lack of deliverable sites and the personal circumstances of the appellant group still exist. Therefore, planning permission should be granted. The objectors raised specific points relating to alleged noise and pollution. These matters, if correct, could have been raised at the time and dealt with under separate legislation, environmental health. However, specifically, there are no dogs on the site, there are no generators at the site as there is mains electricity connected and paid for. Occasional bonfires are lit as at any property but are not lit until the evening. There has been no flooding at the site and no sewage leakage attributed to the applicant group. Reference is made to occupancy conditions not being complied with. This is an unfounded allegation. All planning conditions have been complied with by the applicant group. In closing, I consider that the neighbour's objection is tainted by what appears to have been a 2-metre encroachment on the applicant group's land. This is a matter that is being pursued separately by a boundary disputes specialist.
Okay, thank you, Wendy, for reading out those two statements. That now takes us on to debate. I'll start with this one. Well, look, I think we will all would have experienced applications like this in our own wards from time to time. I myself have had a few of these pitches in Little Thurrock Rectory, and they are incredibly difficult ones to discuss. I mean, ultimately, I would always side with the officer recommendation if it's clear and concise, certainly when it comes to these particular types of sites. And I do sympathise with what the residents have been put up with. I recognise what Councillor Rice has said. I think on a few occasions that these will go to appeal and they will sometimes long out. But ultimately, as councillors, I think we can do what we have in our power, which is to either accept or refuse. I'd be very mindful if we did approve this at this early stage. What sort of message that would send out there to other people looking to move on to Greenbelt land. And as such, I think this is a very straightforward recommendation for refusal. I've not too much to add. I appreciate the concerns that may be coming down the line, but these are the concerns for the appeal of the inspector. And I appreciate we're also behind on our Gypsy Traverse site, but that is being looked at our upcoming local plan. I've got nothing else to add. We'll go Councillor Byrne and then take it from there.
Yeah, to be fair to the people that's there now, I've lived there 5 years and I pass it every day and I didn't even know it was there. So they are well behaved and clean and tight. I don't know anybody, any of my friends even know it was there. So that site is well managed, well looked up, but it's in the wrong place. It's Greenbelt, so it has to be a no. But so if the actual plan is the right plan, wrong place again. So, but the actual, what they're doing now is, so nobody knows it there. So, thank you.
Councillor Rice.
Well, Chair, I was going to suggest that in view of the conflict between the neighbours, they say one thing, and obviously the agent says there are no generators there are no dogs on the site. I was going to suggest we go for a site visit on this because it's quite clear there is a conflict. We are behind in our local plan. We also don't have the number of gypsy and traveller numbers in our local plan. So we look vulnerable to start with at an appeal. So I think before we make a decision, I think we should have a site visit, understand what is precisely there, and then come back and make a firm decision based on the true facts. Because at the moment what we have is we have an objector saying one thing and the agent saying another, and I think we owe it to ourselves just to clarify that situation and make sure it is correct either way before we make a decision.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I hear what you're saying there, Councillor Rice. I mean, for me, whilst I take on board what both parties are saying, the point still remains that this is in the Greenbelt. As Councillor Byrne says, it's in the wrong location. And as for me, it's I think it's as straightforward decision as it comes. It's not only that, but the message on these particular sites. I mean, if it gets out that we're mindful to allow developments on Greenbelt, it's just going to cause more problems down the line. But you are well within your right to call for that site visit. I'll bring in Steve, Councillor Byrne, and then that will need to be seconded, and Councillor Lawrence. So we'll go Steve Taylor first. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I think you've just said roughly what I was going to say. That the issue is not about who's right and wrong, and whether the facts are one thing or the other. The reality is a step away from that, which is development in the Greenbelt. And as you know where I stand on that, you know what my attitude will be. And it was given on a temporary basis because of some circumstances at that time. And the applicants had 5 years to deal with that, and has frankly clearly done very little. So now they're just going to try again. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. But as I say, the issue is much more around why we're refusing it, not about. I mean, it is about the neighbours, but that issue is a bit of an aside, in my opinion. So, thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Councillor Lawrence first and Councillor Byrne.
Well, I don't want to sound too controversial, like I normally do sometimes, but I feel for the neighbours actually. We've all had travellers come on our wards and we all know the problems. These might be law-abiding people, I know, but they've been that way because it's temporary. After 5 years, you know, and now if it becomes permanent, what say will we have in the matter of all of a sudden they have their friends come and stay for parties and they move their caravans on and things like that. I'd be happy if it was temporary and we could monitor them if they broke the rules and then they have to go. But I think we should make a stand and say this is on Greenbelt, otherwise it's going to happen everywhere.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Byrne.
So I think a site visit will be a waste of time because it will say nobody knows they're there. The agent, everything the agent says will be right, but it's Greenbelt, and it's for that reason alone. And if you look at the map, there's nothing anywhere near it. It's green, 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 isn't it? That little plot in the middle. So it's got to be a no-brainer. It has to be no, just on location and planning. Whether they're well behaved, they're criminals or not criminals, it is Greenbelt in the wrong place.
Okay, thank you. If no one else has got their hands up, I'll be looking for a potential seconder for a site visit. Councillor Rice's motion, is there a seconder? No, okay. There's no seconder there. Unless anyone else has anything to add, we'll go straight to the vote. No, okay. So if we look on pages 98, recommendation 8.1. Recommendation 8.1, refuse for the following reasons. I'll recommend that. Is that seconded? Councillor Byrne. Okay, and all those recommendation for approval, please raise your hands. Okay, happy, Wendy. All those against? Okay then, so that's application reference 2000408FUL, and that's Manor View South End Road. That has been refused. Okay then, so that now takes us on to the remaining 4 items on the agenda. Now, Matt will be taking the next 2. That's item 10, which is 20/0048/FUL, Marvy Jade, rear of 150-152. And as he's getting ready, Councillor Byrne, you had your hand up, thank you.
Yeah, we just said the last one we would, at the end of that, say everything's hunky-dory or not, and we would agree to carry on or not carry on. So have we got to do that before you carry on?
Yeah, as I said, no one's raised any further
That's
concerns,
right. Yeah, I'm happy.
so I'm happy to continue. As again,
Yeah.
it does allow himself as chair, so Lee, just quickly, Nadia's raising a question. Is she next or is not? I'll check that before the meeting, Nadia. Hang on. Who's next? Oh, Nadia. Yep. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I've said the wrong one. I said Marvy Jade, rear of 150. Perfect. All right then. Okay, sorry. So that's item 11, 19/0373/OUT, land adjacent to Woodview, and that's Matthew who's going to take us through that one. Found on pages 111 to 138. Thank you. Thanks for raising that, Nadia. Cheers. And Matthew, once you're settled and ready, yeah, take your time.
Right, apologies for that. Ready to go now. First off, a bit of housekeeping. Since publication of the agenda, we've had 2 late letters of objection. And in summary, the first one refers to potential for traffic congestion, increased pollution and the loss of existing green space. And the second late representation refers to the issue of access to the site. Again, potential for traffic congestion, potential for antisocial behaviour and a concern that there could be noise disturbance from the use of any play area within the new proposed development. So if hopefully this is behaving itself. This is an outline application for consideration tonight with all matters reserved, so matters of access, matters of appearance, layout, landscaping, and scale are all reserved. But it is proposing a residential development of up to 75 units, and indicatively that would be split between 57 houses and 18 apartments on a site of approximately 2.6 hectares. So on the screen you can make out the site, and we are talking about this triangular shaped or wedge shaped area of land there in between Woodview running across the sort of northern boundary and Chadwell Road. Just to sort of orientate members, USP College, what used to be called Palmer's, is off there to the south. And the former South East Essex College site, which is now the, well, I was going to say recent, but several years old now, persimmon development there. Again, going through the presentation in terms of local plan allocation. So again, that's the site I'm trying to highlight there for you. That triangular shape is notated in green, so it's within the metropolitan greenbelt. Palmer's off there to the south there. That spotty designation is for open space, so playing areas, etc. And off there to the north, that hatched notation there reflects the fact that in the core strategy, a policy identified that site, which again was the former college, would be a broad location for housing, and that was associated with the relocation of the college to where it is now, which is opposite where we're sitting. So that was through a local plan, through a core strategy policy, there was a development on that particular site. So again, let's just zooming in on the site again. Nothing really to report on that one. Woodview to the north. Site layout indicative. I've mentioned all matters reserved, so please take that with a pinch of salt. Again, but for what it's worth, showing a potential layout of houses with some apartments, which would be at that sort of southwestern corner there. Access is a reserved matter, but the planning regulations require that even if it's reserved, a potential point has to be identified. So on this particular plan, we're on roughly pointing out there is where the single point of access is indicated, and you'll see in the photographs at the moment there's an existing mini roundabout there, so it would take a further arm off of that roundabout to access. All the other detail you see in that particular plan is, as I said, indicative. Series of photographs I'll run you through. So that's taken northwestern corner, looking sort of across the full length of the site, looking southeast. So USP College is off there behind the tree screen on the skyline. Obviously, you can make out an open field that was taken last week, and it's used for the grazing of livestock. So there were some cows there that day laying down because it was just about to rain, I think. So looking the other way, if you believe that old wives' tale. That's looking along that Woodview boundary. So at the very sort of top left there, you can make out some of the new houses, or newish houses, which were built out on the former college site. But again, the site's off there to the right-hand side, again showing the open nature of the site. Again, from about halfway along that road frontage, you're looking into the site. There is a change in levels. Levels do fall away to the south, so you may be able to make out some there are some cranes which are Tilbury Docks on the skyline. You probably won't be able to make them out, but they are there. And looking back the other way, so that's nearer to the persimmon scheme, looking back into the site, some planting, some tree screening along that northern boundary. I mentioned the point of access, so that's taken from just inside the recent residential development, looking south. So the potential point of access into the new development would be taken from a new arm, basically where those trees are, would punch into the new site. So again, the site is behind those trees. And then from the Chedwell Road, so the southern boundary, that's looking back into the site, the far eastern end of the site, where it narrows to a sort of point, if you can imagine a triangle shape. That's quite wooded, actually. It's quite overgrown, so that's not as open, but it's still undeveloped. Again, that's taken from actually part of the eastern boundary where you can get a good view of the site. So again, quite clearly there, Woodview off to the right-hand side, Chedwell Road off to the left, and basically an open field, which makes up probably 95% of the site. And then Chedwell Road, so we'll come back in the other direction away from the sort of persimmon end of the site. So again, showing the open nature of the site. Similarly, about halfway along that frontage, showing the open nature of the site. That's from outside USP. Again, all you can see really is the sporadic planting along the boundaries and the open field beyond, with the houses in Woodview on the skyline. I think there might be one or two more. Again, that's getting towards the western boundary of the site. Looking back up towards the persimmon development, I think that's the last one, which is the western boundary. Again, showing the full length of the site, or virtually the full length of the site, and its open nature, and the fact that it's used for the grazing of livestock at the moment. So I've mentioned that sites within the greenbelt, therefore, as residential development is proposed, this application has been treated as a departure from the development plan. As ever with greenbelt applications, there are three key questions for consideration. Firstly, whether the development is appropriate or inappropriate. Secondly, the matter of harm to the greenbelt, be it by harm to openness or the purposes or any other harm. And thirdly, whether identified harm is clearly outweighed by any other considerations, such that very special circumstances could exist to justify a grant of planning permission. So on that first question, whether or not it's appropriate development or inappropriate, well, the proposal is for new buildings, clearly, new residential buildings, assessing that against the exceptions which are set out in the MPPF, that's paragraph 145. None of the exceptions are met in this case, therefore it's an easy conclusion to reach that the development is inappropriate development in the greenbelt. Having reached that conclusion, it's then the next step to say is that there is harm by definition, because paragraph 143 of the MPPF says that inappropriate development is by definition harmful. Turning to other harm, National Planning Policy Guidance provides guidance for both spatial and visual harm, because openness, as described by that document, assigns both visual and spatial aspects to openness. So the report considers that the introduction of new buildings on a fairly large scale would harm both the visual and spatial aspects of openness. There is also a degree of permanence. Again, National Planning Policy Guidance refers to whether or not the development would be transitory in nature or permanent. Clearly, a residential development of this nature would be there for several decades, so there would be harm to openness by reason of the degree of permanence. And there would be further harm, we consider, as a result from activity, i.e. disturbance, everyday comings and goings. And again, National Planning Policy Guidance refers to impact on openness in those terms as well. So in conclusion, under that particular heading, yes, there would be harm to openness. We've also mentioned the fact that because there are two fairly prominent road frontages to the site, Woodview and Chadwell Road, there would be a need for acoustic mitigation. So there'd be a need for a 2 metre high acoustic fence along those quite long road frontages. Again, going back to greenbelt and openness, the visual appearance of a 2 metre high acoustic barrier would harm the visual aspect of openness. Turning to the third argument in terms of greenbelt, i.e. whether or not, the third consideration in terms of purposes of the greenbelt, i.e. under the heading of harm, it is on the edge of the built-up area. So in terms of I'll jump back a little bit on the presentation. So for the benefit of everybody watching, clearly Little Thurrock is this built-up area to the north, and to the west, this site is on the edge of the built-up area. So in terms of greenbelt purpose 1, which is about restricting the sprawl of large built-up areas, we've concluded that there would be harm to that purpose, i.e. the built area would spread onto a currently open site. In terms of greenbelt purpose 3, which is safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, again, the spread of built development onto an open site would de facto harm that greenbelt purpose. And the third purpose of the greenbelt, i.e. assisting urban regeneration by encouraging recycling of urban land, well, again, the development as proposed doesn't do anything in terms of recycling previously developed land or land within the urban area, so there would be harm to that greenbelt purpose as well. So taking all that greenbelt harm together, definitional harm, harm to openness, harm to the greenbelt purposes, in accordance with the NPPF, you have to afford that substantial weight in your considerations. Final greenbelt question is whether or not that harm and any other harm, I've mentioned the visual impact of an acoustic barrier, whether or not that harm combined would be clearly outweighed by factors which would amount to very special circumstances. So the applicant has put forward a number of different arguments in support of their proposal. The first one is 5-year housing land supply, and officers have sat at this committee quite often and explained to you as a committee that we haven't got a 5-year housing land supply. The NPPF encourages all local planning authorities to have that, so it's that's accepted. And looking at a number of recent appeal decisions, I'm thinking of Little Thurrock Marshes in particular, but there is a more recent one from earlier this week. You have to afford that particular benefit substantial weight. However, again, looking at a number of appeal decisions, that factor on its own will not be enough to clearly outweigh the harm. So yes, you can ascribe that factor significant positive weight, but on its own, it is not enough to clearly outweigh harm. Second factor referred to by the applicant is basically a reference to the NPPF in Chapter 5. Now, Chapter 5 is about delivering a sufficient supply of homes, and there are 2 paragraphs in particular referred to by the applicant, which in summary refer to boosting housing supply and the contribution of small and medium sites towards housing supply. However, I mean, that's recognised. There is a government policy intention about boosting housing land supply, but when that comes up against Greenbelt basically trumps it. There's nothing in that particular chapter of the NPPF which would override Greenbelt considerations. The third factor promoted by the applicant is about Greenbelt purposes. Now, I've given our interpretation of how the application sits against those purposes. The applicant refers to purposes and also refers to the Council's Strategic Greenbelt Assessments. That's 2019. That's a document which will support the new local plan. And the applicant is suggesting that that site, the application site, is within a parcel, a wider parcel of land, which was recommended for further assessment. Now, in response to that, we've set out in the report that the Greenbelt Assessment is a technical document. It doesn't identify specific sites or indeed broad areas, and the decision to amend Greenbelt boundaries will be taken through the local plan process. So there's only very, very limited weight which can be afforded to that factor. We've done a Greenbelt assessment. That's part of the story which will inform the new local plan. But that decision about when boundaries will change will not happen for a little while yet. So you have to consider what's in front of you, and you can only afford in our opinion, very limited weight to that particular emerging planning policy situation. Fourth factor, the applicant refers to the NPPF and the main thrust of the NPPF in trying to achieve sustainable development. Yes, that is the main thrust of the NPPF. It's about achieving sustainable development. However, there's nothing within paragraph 11 of the NPPF which would outweigh harm to the Greenbelt or indeed outweigh Greenbelt policies. There would be some economic benefit to the proposals. Clearly, during construction, new households would help in terms of household spending, etc. However, weighing that against the environmental impact of developing the Greenbelt argument clearly outweighs, in our opinion. Fifth factor promoted by the applicant again is a reference to the NPPF and making effective use of land. That particular part of the NPPF refers to previously developed land or brownfield sites. There's nothing in that particular chapter of the NPPF which refers to Greenbelt, and again, it simply doesn't override Greenbelt considerations. The final factor referred to by the applicant is, again, surprised to hear, another reference to the NPPF and chapter 12, which is titled Achieving Well-Designed Places. This is an outline application, so the detail is reserved, and in any case, your own policies in the core strategy and the NPPF require good design, so that can't be considered as a positive benefit which would outweigh harm to the Greenbelt. So wrapping all those Greenbelt arguments up, there's harm by definition, there's harm to openness, and there's harm to the purposes of the Greenbelt. There's also the visual harm of the potential acoustic barrier. None of those arguments offered by the applicant clearly outweigh that harm, and therefore very special circumstances, put simply, do not exist. Briefly turning to the other factors, the other planning factors within this particular case. Traffic and highways, there is no objection from Highways England subject to condition. The council's highways officer did raise some concerns about the internal layout and the point of access. However, remind you again, this is an outline application with all matters reserved. So the internal layout you have to consider as indicative. And we've concluded that if the principal Greenbelt argument was to be accepted in terms of resolution to grant planning permission for argument's sake, then the reserve matters and planning conditions could address those internal layout concerns. So there's nothing in terms of highways or traffic which would raise a reason for refusal in this particular case. In terms of flooding, the area is not within the high-risk flood zone and subject to conditions. There are no objections from the council's flood risk manager. In terms of planning obligations, affordable housing has been offered, and I think it's fair to say that under the heading of housing land supply, obviously you can consider affordable housing land within that. Again, you can afford that significant weight. Going back to the Greenbelt argument, it's not enough on its own. The council's education officer has suggested contributions. They are agreed by the applicant, so there's no real issue with potential planning obligations. The report, the final sort of chapter of the report, refers to the comments received from the environmental health officer. There are no air quality issues here, but I've mentioned the point about noise. There are two fairly prominent road frontages, so in mitigation, an acoustic barrier is required. That would be 2 metres high along quite a lengthy road frontage, as you can make out from the aerial picture there. So we've concluded that there would be visual impact resulting from that particular barrier, and that forms a reason for refusal. Wrapping everything up together, Chair, I'm nearly getting to the end. The main issue here is Greenbelt. It's inappropriate. There's harm to openness. There's harm to Greenbelt purposes. There's visual harm from the acoustic barrier. There are no factors which would convincingly or clearly outweigh their harm. Therefore, there are no very special circumstances. Therefore, the recommendation before you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that very detailed report. Okay, then that takes us into questions. Matthew, just quickly, it was something you raised there. You mentioned a reference to a Balvin site. So Greenbelt, was this one that we rejected and it went to appeal? Can you just give us a bit more detail on that one? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So again, members may recall, I think it was June last year in the chamber, and I think I was presenting again actually, so I come back like a bad penny. So we had an application for 116 dwellings, a site in Balvin. So that was between the recreation ground and the bypass, sort of behind Church Road. Again, it was an outline application. I think everything reserved apart from access. It was refused by this committee. The applicant appealed, and we had the decision come through, dated the 19th. I think it actually came through on Tuesday. Appeal was dismissed. I mean, the highlights there, in terms of the issues identified by the inspector, again, is it inappropriate development, the impact on openness. The inspector also considered whether or not the proposal would be in accordance with the environmental dimension of sustainable development. So sustainable development in the NPPF has three limbs. It has an environmental limb, an economic limb, and a social limb, if I remember correctly. The Greenbelt conclusion, in a nutshell, was that there was harm by way of definitional harm, by way of harm to openness, and by way of harm to two of the Greenbelt purposes. The applicant was promoting 5-year housing land supply and also affordable housing in that particular case, and the inspector concluded, yes, that is a benefit, and that attracts, and I'm quoting directly here, that attracts significant weight in favour of the proposal. But in terms of all the other benefits which the applicant relied on, and those were sustainability credentials, that's in terms of built sustainability, ecological enhancement, provision of some community facilities, and interestingly enough here, the Balvin appeal, the appellant referred again to the emerging local plan and the fact that the issues and options consultation from beginning of last year had identified Balvin as a potential expansion. The inspector took that into account but said that issues and options consultation was an option and an option only, and it had no weight in the planning balance. So positive, significant weight to housing land supply, limited weight to ecology, limited weight to community facilities, no weight to the other factors. Harm to Greenbelt wasn't clearly outweighed, therefore that appeal was dismissed. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right then, we'll now open it up to further questions. Steve Taylor, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So I think what you've just done is rather neatly summed up what I was going to ask you, which is even when you sum together all of their, in inverted commas, extra special, or what they put forward as extra special circumstances, when you put those together, they still don't equate relative to the harm being done, which is exactly the case you've just explained there at Balvin. Am I right in assuming that that's exactly what you're saying about this site?
Yeah, the short answer is yes.
Yes, fine. I thought it was, but I just, only because you've just given me that example, which is great. Thanks, Matthew.
Okay, well, I'll go to Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Lawrence.
Can I just confirm that this is just for preliminary planning? So all the plans that we've got here tonight, if it's considered that they can build on that area, then everything what you're saying against it, the building, the acoustics and things like that, that could all be changed, and also the entrance?
Chair, no, this is an application, it's an outline application, but the applicant is seeking to establish the principle of residential development. So this is, although the layout is indicative, although I'm not going to show you elevations, because again, they're indicative, the principle is at stake. You know, that's quite clear and quite an important point to make. The principle of you agreeing or not residential development on that site is at stake here through the consideration of this outline application. So if you were to go against the recommendation, I'm not suggesting you do, but you will make your own mind up on that. If you were to go against the recommendation and decided you wanted to support the scheme, you have established the principle of development.
It's just that I didn't realise, when seeing the pictures up there, I didn't realise what the area actually looked like. I know I've drove past there in the past, and I haven't really noticed those cows and the fields, and I haven't seen any of that. So I wasn't even quite sure. It was only tonight driving past come here, I just see an extra entrance, what could have been used, which actually one of the residents put in, saying that that could have been an alternative way to go in. But I know that isn't the fundamental thing tonight. Tonight we're discussing whether or not you can build on it. But out of all the harm and the harm and the harm, what you've been talking about, the only two harm things I can see is that it's greenbelt, yes, and harm to visual aspects. And we're doing an awful lot of harm to visual aspects in a lot of our own wards where we are. And looking at that little picture tonight, it didn't look like it was a nature reserve or anything like that. It just looked like a bit of green grass to me. And as for the acoustics and saying the fence, I know personally about noise where I am. I'm having a 6-lane dual carriageway built next to me and no one consulted me. And next to it, we're having trees because they're a fantastic way of making it look green. You wouldn't even see the buildings there because I'm hoping that's what it's going to be to me, and it blocks all the sound out. So I know that these are things that I think we should consider. But if you're just no to everything on Greenbelt, all well and good, stick by it. But there's going to be lots of times where we're going to come here and we've got to face the fact, yes or no. And it would be nice if we could work with the officers and they guide us what they've already got in their mind, what they're going to say yes and no to. Because sometimes things get turned down and then 3 or 4 months later we hear of a really big housing scheme right next door to what they've just said no to. So if we was all clear and everything was transparent, I think we'd all work a lot better together.
Okay, thank
Chair,
you.
just there's a couple of things I'll try and pick up there. So I mentioned the fact it's an outline application, so it's about the principle. And yes, put simply, this is fundamental greenbelt consideration. Now, yes, it's an open site, but the primary characteristic of the greenbelt is its openness. In fact, if you refer back to the MPPF, it says greenbelt's all about openness and about their permanence. So yes, it's an open site, and you picked up on the fact, yes, it's not a nature reserve. That's immaterial. The fact that it's an open site is the key point here, because the key characteristic, or one of the 2 key characteristics of greenbelts, are their openness, and it's about keeping land permanently open. So the fact that it's not of significant nature conservation interests, or that there might be, you can only just about see it through bits, gaps in the hedgerow, really that's something you should put from your minds. The fact that it's there, the fact that it's devoid of built development, and the fact that it's open are its key characteristics. And national policy and your own local plan policies are about protecting and preserving that openness. So it's as simple as that in greenbelt terms.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I get what you're saying. It's greenbelt, and we should protect as much greenbelt as possible, and we've all got that all in our wards. But like I say, we've got to make really tough decisions. So I think we should look at and engage everything on their own merit.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Byrne.
Yeah, can we put that slide up, west boundary looking east, and we can all decide? For me, that's the one with a picture of the cows. I mean, that for me smacks of harm. And to Angela, I'll say that, Councillor Lawrence says it's just a green field. So I think that tells the story. That picture to me just says harm. So you put it up for everybody to. Thank you.
Give us a second, Chair.
Okay, yeah. So we'll wait for that. Now, what I'll do, we'll go to we've got 2 speaker statements, and I'll get Wendy to speak those out very shortly. Councillor Rice had a question before we went to speaker statements and debate. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think it was the last. Yeah. So that's yes. That is from the thickest part of the triangle, looking towards the thinnest part of the site, if you like.
Yes, on page 113, it says no relevant planning history. Yet I can quite clearly remember Sainsbury's asking for a supermarket there. Do we not have that noted?
Yeah, I could do a double check of the planning history. It will take me a minute or two.
Yeah,
to do
no,
that.
no, I'm just curious because there's a statement there which we say there's no planning history, but I can remember quite clearly that Sainsbury's did ask to put a supermarket on this land.
Yeah, while I'm checking, Chair, I mean, it's relevant. So if it would have, if it was an application for argument's sake a number of years ago under a different planning policy regime, then we may have taken a view about relevance. I'm going to fire up the system and see what pops up. You'll have to bear with me.
Okay, yeah, in the meantime, as you're looking for that, Matt, do you have a right to pop to speaker statements and then I'll allow questions afterwards as well?
Yes.
If that's helpful. Right, Wendy, there's two speaker statements. Both, I believe, are in objection. The first one is a resident, Sean Meehan. If you could read that out, and then from the fellow ward councillor, and then I'll field further questions after. Thank you.
Chair, there should be three. Just to let you know. Just start with the statement objection from Sean Meehan.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll take a look. Sorry.
Earlier this year, I wrote my reasons for strongly objecting the proposals, and my feelings remain the same today. However, if concessions were promised, I would be less so. Number one, the roads surrounding the land are already very busy and are at this time not fit for purpose to accommodate another 75 homes in such a small area. The junction between Woodview and Chadwell Road traffic lights is particularly horrendous and suffers well and truly with immense noise and no doubt high pollution. At peak times, vehicle queues on Woodview can easily reach 20 to 30 deep. The whole area is effectively an amphitheatre of noise with no real sound shielding, and the new development would of course increase this. Having a young family and living as close to the junction as I do, all of the above already has an effect on daily living standards. Number two, I can see within the plans that the potential entry point into the new development would be via Woodview. Given what I have already mentioned so far, I strongly disagree with this. I simply cannot support the plans until alternatives are brought forward to help the current traffic flow / noise and air pollution levels at the junction and surrounding roads. Concessions. 1. Any entry point to the new development should be via Chadwell Road further away from nearby homes. 2. I would think about permanently blocking Woodview after the mini roundabout that serves Culverin Avenue into the newish estate if you were coming from Black Shots, and any vehicles requiring / coming from Chadwell Road use the current bus only route with improvements like making it two-way on the other side of the land that appears to not get to use that all. 3. The planting of many more trees, especially the land near the junction of Woodview and Chadwell Road traffic lights. I have tried for well over a year to have this arranged with the council, but to no avail. It desperately needs huge amounts of shielding to help counter the current noise / air pollution levels. 4. Introduce high-speed bumps to the whole surrounding area of Woodview and Chadwell Road. The amount of vehicles speeding is ridiculous, and I'm surprised none have been introduced already, considering the college is so close by.
Excellent, thank you very much. We'll go to the next statement. Is that Councillor Redsells? Excellent, thank you, Wendy. Please proceed.
Yes, Councillor Redsells' statement of objection. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this application. I'm speaking against this application. This is a piece of land between the wards of Little Thurrock Rectory and Little Thurrock Blackshots. In the ward of Blackshots, there was an influx of housing in a development on the old college site which brought over 400 new homes to the area, which added more congestion to this part of the ward. This is a piece of greenbelt that needs to remain as greenbelt. The land in the 60s had toxic waste put there. The doctor's surgery is full to capacity, so are the schools. As local councillors, we have tried to calm some of the traffic problems in this area, working with the residents to achieve this, as we had an extension to Woodside School, also an extension to Treetop School. In the plans for the school, we are hoping to succeed in calming the traffic pollution. This application will undo all the hard work that has been achieved. The road network is not sustainable with Palmer's College on one side and 2 schools on the other side. It is called Woodview for a reason. If more housing is allowed here on this small piece of green belt, there will be no view. There are not any relevant reasons for housing to be placed here. Just because the land is there, it does not mean it has to be built upon. Green belt is there to stop urban sprawl. The development would have a detrimental effect on the area. In Thurrock, we are trying to cut down on travelling by car. This would just add more traffic to this area. This small piece of land is what keeps a small amount of openness to this part of the ward. I cannot see any special circumstances to warrant this piece of land being used for housing. The road capacity is not there, especially when schools are in situ. What we do not touch on very often is the wildlife in our green belt and the loss of trees. The borough is trying to put in more trees, not less. This is very near the A13 and the Dock Approach Road. The area has enough traffic problems at this moment in time without adding to it. This development would bring chaos and devastation to the Woodside estate. I have noticed that you have had many letters from residents against the application. I would like to thank you for listening to me at this committee on behalf of my residents.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, what we'll do then, Matt, if you want to come in and field some questions, then we'll go to the last speaker statement. Matt, cheers.
Yeah, Chair. The question from Councillor Rice about planning history. The most recent planning record we have for that site is from 1974, and the proposal considered then was for a supermarket, shops, petrol filling station, toilets, car parking. It was refused planning permission, and an appeal was subsequently dismissed.
Okay, and Shinnick, after you had it. Shinnick, thank you.
My question is, why has there got to be sand barriers around that estate when the other houses all round there are open? You know, you're quite near the front of the road. So they're going to build these and you're going to put a sand barrier up there. I can't understand why that's got to happen.
Yeah, Chair, the houses you would have seen on the photographs to the north on Woodview, probably interwar, I'd imagine, probably 1930s, and things like acoustic attenuation probably wasn't even thought about then, or wouldn't have thought. What the applicant has recognised in their submission is that it will be a factor because you have 2 roads which carry east-west traffic in that area. So they have submitted a noise assessment, and that's to make sure that both the internal noise environment and external areas, so private garden areas, would achieve a reasonable noise level, and there are World Health Organization guidelines for what is a reasonable internal and external area. So the applicant's own report, it's a noise assessment technical report, concluded that there would be an impact, and that input would need to be mitigated. And in terms of external areas, it would need a fence. Now, it would be responsible for us as an authority, both a planning authority and an environmental health authority, to make sure new residential properties can enjoy a reasonable level of amenity. So that's the current up-to-date position, that if a report identifies an issue and then promotes mitigation to address that issue, then that is the way forward for a layout of a scheme. And there's acoustic attenuation on any number of schemes in the borough, including commercial schemes. So it wouldn't apply to those existing dwellings simply because they're decades old. But for a new development, it's relevant, and the applicant has proposed mitigation. Our concern as officers is that on those 2 quite long and quite prominent road frontages, there'd be a potential for an unrelieved 2 metre high, quite thick wooden fence. Potentially not the most attractive thing, especially bearing in mind the open nature of the site, and it is, again, going back to the green belt and visual harm.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Shinnick again.
Yeah, I was just wondering if they could do like screening. I mean, Gerard here, he's had his fence done and he's got wire fence and they've got trees growing up. So if they had something like that in front of the fence, you know, it's an idea.
From my experience of these matters, and I'm not a noise expert, I'll set that out straight away, but from my understanding of how noise is mitigated, soft landscaping, trees, bushes, whatever, they're pretty meaningless as I understand it. It does need to be a hard timber fence, which is a certain thickness, which mitigates. I'm thinking back to things like, for instance, the A13, when DP World London Gateway got to a certain point of development, mitigation had to go in. So if you drive along the A13, you probably won't see it now because of the road widening, but that was a 2 metre high acoustic fence, which is a timber fence, because that's the most effective way of mitigating noise impact. So again, what I sense is you're focusing on that as a noise issue. It does relate to the greenbelt issue, because if you're a potential new resident on that estate, you would be reliant on an acoustic barrier so that you could reasonably enjoy your rear garden. That's it in a nutshell. But there's overlap with greenbelt here. By securing a reasonable rear garden environment, there's a knock-on effect in terms of visual impact on the greenbelt. It would need to be a substantial fence. As I said, as I understand the situation, relying on trees or hedges just simply won't achieve the noise level.
I'm sorry, before you go any further, Councillor Rush, I'd like to suspend standing orders for the remainder of the meeting. Is that agreed? Yeah, excellent. Agreed.
Question I'd like to pose, I mean, I understand what you're saying about the fence, but we do come back to this burning issue. One, we're working off an old local plan. We do have a suite of policies, but we are told by Paul Shadavarian, cornerstone barristers, who gave us planning training only 18 months ago, that the government have requested us to build 32,000 homes. And he quite clearly said at that there were 24,000 would have to be built in the green fields and 8,000 in the brown. Now, somehow we've got to grasp this nettle. And with COVID-19, the idea that a local plan, we've heard tonight that a planning appeal could take up to 12 months. So God only knows what a local plan will take. We could be looking now for a local plan. It might be 25, 26, 27 before we get a true local plan. But we're still under pressure from the government to deliver housing numbers. And at this time, and I'll be corrected by the officer, but we tend to fail at housing numbers. And I'm curious at our present levels, are we not in some form of special measures that we've had to put in voluntarily at this time? And we have not met those measures.
Sorry, I'll bring Lee. Would you like to come in here? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to answer some of those questions, the local plan is the answer for housing. For strategic growth, it has to be a planned delivery through a local plan. It shouldn't be delivered through sporadic ad hoc applications made on the greenbelt. The QC advice that you've been given previously made the point that housing is required, but equally sets out through the MPPF that housing need doesn't trump the greenbelt. So the greenbelt is your primary hurdle. That's what needs to be overcome. In terms of local plan and how long local plans will take, the government does require all local authorities to have local plans in place by 2023. So that is a target. That is the timetable that we're working on, and are accelerating work with the local plan at a pace. In terms of the housing numbers, I would just make the point that whilst the planning committee and councils can grant consents, delivery is in the hands of house builders, and that is affected by COVID-19 and other market forces. But it isn't the answer just to grant consent for any application that comes before the committee just to make numbers. It should be about place making and the right development in the right place at that right time. So, Chair, just with that, I just wanted to just cover off those points very quickly. Thank you.
Chair, can I just add one thing very quickly? I think Lee's right with the backstop of 2023, because I think that the government's new white paper, I don't think it's actually published yet, but that's been widely reported in the planning press that local authorities will be given a backstop of an adoption of a local plan by the end of 2023. So that's what we are working to. All I'm going to say very briefly is we know about 5-year housing land supply, and we've known for a number of years that this authority hasn't had a 5-year housing land supply. That didn't stop us successfully defending an appeal at Balvin with a decision at the end of last week. So yes, it's a factor which attracts weight, and it attracts significant positive weight. On its own, that will not outweigh harm to the Greenbelt. That is as simply put as I can. Greenbelt will always outweigh, in any recent appeal decision I've seen, that single factor. There has to be an accumulation of factors all leading to a convincing case which clearly outweighs harm. Those factors don't apply here.
Okay, thank you. Now, we did have a remaining speaker statement, and then I'll bring in Councillor Lawrence, and then we'll go into debate. Right, Lindsay, there was one last statement. This is from Gary Coxall, as the agent. Would you like to read that statement? Thank you.
With regard to application number 19/0137/out, we would like to point out the following points, all of which are explained in more detail in the design, access and planning statement that was submitted with the application. The statement that was submitted with the application clearly demonstrates why this application should be acceptable, and I highlight the points for consideration below. It describes in section 2 the sustainability credentials of the site in respect of local facilities. Provides the details of special circumstances that exist in section 3 in respect of the council's lack of 5-year housing supply and the important contributions small and medium-sized sites make to meeting the housing need, as they can usually be built out relatively quickly. The site is located within strategic parcel number 31 in the council's strategic Greenbelt assessment, and in terms of checking the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas and preventing neighbouring towns, merging is considered to have a slight/negligible importance and, in our opinion, not undermine the purpose of the Greenbelt. Section 4 provides details of government and local planning policy that supports development. It is important to note that the proposal meets the council's policy in respect of section 106 contributions and affordable housing. Thank you for taking the time to read this statement, and trust that you are able to provide much needed housing in Thurrock by approving this application.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'll field one more question, and then we'll go into debate. Councillor Lawrence.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to wait and go into the debate.
Okay, all right then. What I'll do then, did you have a question, Councillor Lawrence? We'll do questions and debate.
Yeah. Just on this, the agent makes the situation, the local authority, this site's located within strategic parcel number 31 in the council's strategic Greenbelt assessment. And in terms of checking the unrestricted sprawl of the large built up areas, what I'm asking is this the correct statement? And if it is, are we not almost obliged to follow that, because you've actually identified this as a site for release?
Chair, if you look at paragraph 7.29, so what Councillor Rice is referring to is the applicant's statement in support of the proposal, and they are relying and they're praying in aid the council's Greenbelt assessment. So that was an assessment produced last year, which will inform the new local plan. So it looked at large parcels, not individual sites, not individual fields. It looked at large parcels across the entirety of the Greenbelt in the borough, and made an assessment about their contribution to a number of the Greenbelt purposes, not all of them, a number. What we've done in paragraph 7.29 is address that, because it's a published document, it's out there, and what we've said there is that particular assessment says that the site is within parcel 31, and the recommendations or the conclusions of the assessment are that that parcel which is a bigger parcel and includes this land, but also includes our land, requires or is recommended, I should say, for more detailed scrutiny assessment. That document was part of the issues and options consultation, or it was published just towards the end of it from recollection. So the issues and options stage 2 consultation, if you read the fine print detail, what it says, and we've quoted directly within paragraph 7.29, is that the purpose of that assessment does not specifically identify any sites or broad areas of Greenbelt for development, as any decision on the need to amend the boundary of the Greenbelt and Thurrock must be taken as part of the wider plan making and evidence development process. So that goes back to the point Lee was making about, if we're changing boundaries, we do it through a local plan. We don't do it on an ad hoc basis through individual planning applications. And again, going back to that very recent appeal decision from last week, because again, the appellant for that case in Balvin referred to the Thurrock local plan issues and options stage 2 consultation. So the inspector looked at that and said basically it was an option. So development in that particular case, there was an option for a village expansion at Balvin. It was an option. So again, I can quote directly from the inspector. He looked at it and he said the inclusion of Balvin as one option in the process of discerning optimum location for developments is not a benefit or an exceptional circumstance. It attracts no weight in the planning balance. So that Greenbelt assessment, yes, looks at a number of parcels, including this site as a wider parcel, and makes recommendations. They're only recommendations, they're only options. By the time we get to 2023 with the new local plan, those hard decisions will have to be made. But as things stand tonight, you have to take a decision on what policy is and what is telling local planning authorities to do.
Okay then, thank you. I think we've had quite a lot of questions on that one, so we'll now open up to debate. I'll go to Councillor Lawrence very shortly. I will start off. So, looking at this particular area, it's quite close to my ward. It's not in my ward, it's Blackshots, but it is quite close. So I know it quite well. I was brought up on King Edward Drive, which effectively leads onto the site, but right down the other end. Yes, it has always been a horses field. I think personally it is a nice little green lung in North Grays, Grays leading into Chadwell, which is quite a heavily developed area. I think for me on this particular site, the roads, I do sympathise with the residents. They do get incredibly busy, certainly around school starting and leaving times. You know, that's a big issue. If we're going to add more cars to this road, we've got to be aware that it is near a college, it is near a school. I think there are plans coming up for a secondary school, so we need to be careful with how much traffic we're putting on those roads that close to a college that's been there for a very long time. I accept what Councillor Shinnick's saying. It is a slightly messy field, but then again, it is used there for horses and grazing. I think what particularly kills this application for me is this acoustic barrier. Of course, you could say, well, look, let's remove the acoustic barrier. One, I don't think that's an option, and two, the whole point of it is that it protects the site, but they are absolutely horrible. And I think ultimately, this site is surrounded by housing or a college. I understand what Councillor Lawrence is saying. We look at our own wards, and we all have to part with difficult decisions and developments. I think one thing I would say about a local plan, I know it's frustrating, but I think as a council, we go through that process together. Yes, the council has put weight towards this particular application and our lack of housing supply, but we can influence that local plan, and that is coming up. I think ultimately, if we do start selling off these Greenbelt sites, it's going to cause us a problem further down the line. Now, it's a little bit ironic for me to say that, because last month I did approve a retirement complex on the Greenbelt, but for me, I can justify that, I can defend the decision. I could defend what happened last month because I thought it was a brilliant opportunity. What we're looking at here is just simply bog standard housing. And if you're going to build on Greenbelt, you need to bring something else to the table. You want to build on Greenbelt, you need to wow me. And ultimately, this is just standard housing. 35% affordable housing, that's just standard. That's the basic what we expect on any application. So, for me, this is a big no-no. I hope that when we go to the vote, that the members follow my recommendation. But ultimately, you'll make your own minds up on this one, and I'll take it from there. I don't have too much more to say on it. But I'll take you over to Councillor Lawrence. Thank you.
Would you like to go first, Councillor Byrne? Oh, you've got nothing to say. Oh, sorry. I'd just like to. There's a couple of points actually. I don't really agree with the sound barrier from the officer because I've really looked into this in my own situation. Yes, you do need a sound barrier, and yes, DP World did put one up, but that's because they've got constant HGVs going along a major motorway, so that's totally different. And also, what you do is you put shrubs in front of the barrier, and then you have 3 different levels of height. Laurel is one of the best ones you can do, and there's a big list of trees what one of the officers in the council have got, which he's gave me what you plant. So seeing the barrier is no problem at all because you won't see it, and with the extra trees in front of it, that's no problem at all as well. But everyone's got their own opinion, and we all disagree. Whatever, that's what we're all here for, to talk about it. I'm not saying for certain that I would agree or not, because seeing these pictures tonight, it does come across different to me. Perhaps I need to go back and have another look. I just don't know. But what I do know is that I sat on the committee, like some of us might have done at Palmer's College. And in Palmer's College, they got to a point where they were so desperate to get teachers there, they were thinking of selling some of their ground at Palmer's College to build units on there to get teachers to come there. Now, if this little area was considered that you could have some sort of planning on it, you could mould it and get some really nice places there for teachers to come. It doesn't have to be, but it is there. It's just yes or no, can we do something there? And I'm sure if we all work together, we could, we can do good things. We can do good things around here. But everyone's got their own opinion, and like I say, I'm not quite sure myself now, especially Councillor Byrne forcing me to look at these cows all night long, what looked really nice there. But I can honestly say I didn't realise how big it was or whatever. To me, it just looked like a load of rough old grass, nothing, and all I can think of is Palmer's College and that they need all the help they can get them back in. So it's something to consider.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Byrne?
Yeah, and I'm just picking up what Councillor Lawrence said. I mean, we've done this last week and last month. We talked about jobs, this bill because of jobs, but we're not a job centre. We are a planning committee, and that's what we've got to look at, the plan, not if we give someone a job or take someone off the job list. We are planning, and that says harm, but it does tick every box when you look at it. You've got 5-bedroom houses that takes the top earners and it goes right down to the on the ladder. So that you look at that and you think, I say yes, but then you look at that and you've got to say no. So I'm like with Councillor Lawrence, mixed views on this one.
Yeah, we'll go to Steve and then Councillor Rice.
Thanks, Chair. I noted earlier on that Councillor Rice brought up some training that we had, and I know he was at one of the training sessions that I was on, where the person that was talking to us made a very, 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 very big point, where he said you have to understand that the laws and rules around the Greenbelt are very draconian, and that in its very nature gives you an indication of the view of building on the Greenbelt. Now, that doesn't mean to say this committee can't go against that or try to, but the reality of it is exactly as you say. It is a piece of Greenbelt. There isn't a great deal around there, in that area. There's the 2 minor roads, but you've also got running alongside it the Docks Approach Road. And given that you've now got Tilbury 2, there's going to be even more vehicles on that. And I know it's at a lower level, but the reality is you still hear it. There's that constant noise. So, but the principle behind it is the fact that it's a piece of Greenbelt land, and there's nothing special about any of it. If you look, the average field looks fairly scruffy, especially when they've just harvested it. But you understand it's still Greenbelt, and it is grown on. And this is used for grazing. Obviously cattle and as well as horses, and I would suggest that's a much nicer environment to look at than 2-metre fences or anything else. And the bottom line is the rules are draconian. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Rice.
Yes, Chair. we look at page 131 and we talk about the consent for 75 residential units. Where are we? We are in a borough, whether we like it or not, we have a shortage of homes. We don't have a government coming forward and saying, let's build 1 million council homes and let's solve the housing crisis in this country. So what we have to do, we have to lean to private developers giving us 35% affordable. And it's interesting what our housing officer says. They need 1 and 2 bedroom homes, of which the applicant has said, yes, we recognise that, we'll give you that as your section 106. They go on further, and I believe there's a £600,000 contribution also within the 106. We have to start to bite the bullet. And the bullet is this. We have people on our housing lists, whether we like it or not. On our current council housing list, there's the 10-year wait. Now, you can't run away from that. And we also have a position now where we can't attract teachers into this borough. We're having difficulty with police officers. Even some council officers have great difficulty coming to this borough. We have this situation. So we need homes for key workers, which Councillor Lawrence alluded to. To me, it is a difficult one. I know the area and I've seen it. I was educated at Palmer Sixth Form College. To me, it's a rough piece of ground. Yes, there are a few cattle grazing there. But at the end of the day, people need homes. And I don't think we can run away from that. I understand the arguments of the Greenbelt, understand them very well. We have to have benchmarks, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, we need homes. And whether we like it, we have a 10-year waiting list for people trying to get homes in this borough. Now, the applicant has said they will provide 35% affordable homes. The housing officer has said it's council's preference for 1 and 2 bedroom homes, and the applicant has agreed that. Now, we either have 2 positions in this country, or this council. We either start to build council homes using public money or at over 45 years and build them in vast quantities so we solve our housing problem, or we have to go down this route where every application that comes to us, we have to say to the applicant, oh, you're doing 75 or we want 35% and that equates to X number of homes. These are the difficult choices. And at the end of the day, perhaps we're all very lucky people around here. We have our own homes or we rent a home. But it doesn't take it away from people that haven't got homes. I can show you emails, Chair, which I've got tonight. A lady, she's sofa sleeping with 2 sons. What is she given by the local authority? She's given emergency housing in Southend, where she's got a job in Thurrock. It doesn't solve a problem. So we have to grasp these situations and actually say, well, we understand the Greenbelt argument, but guess what? We've got residents on a 10-year waiting list. We've got residents trapped up in high-rise flats. And it's for those type of reasons that we've got youngsters now that can't afford to leave home. So we've got a generation of kids in their 30s that are still living with mum and dad. Sooner or later, Chair, we have to grasp the situation. In the short term, I believe we have to grasp the situation and take the 35%. In the long term, we do need to build homes for rent. We're not there. we haven't got a local plan. You know, we've got great difficulties. If you look at our 5-year supply, we're actually a failing authority, which doesn't sit comfortable with me. And every application we do approve will go towards filling those gaps. And I still say, Chair, you know, when you've got a 10-year housing waiting list, you need to look at every application on its merits and say, you know, is this pristine greenbelt? If we're honest, the definition of greenbelt, yes, it's green, it's unappended, fine, but we've got an application here that will actually give us some homes for people that have no homes. And it's for those reasons, Chair, that I would support this tonight, because I feel awfully sorry for people that are sofa sleeping rough on the streets. They're with their mum and dad, with 2 or 3 children. It's all those reasons, Chair, that we need to actually start to look at these applications. They might not sit comfortably with us, but it's my belief that we should look at these seriously, because at the end of the day, it's nice if you've got a house, but if you haven't, is it hard luck? Or just go away and go to your relatives, or go sofa sleeping. You know, there's some fundamental things that are wrong. And that's why I think we should take the 35% affordable and run with this. Those are my views, Chair. I respect yours. And obviously when a vote comes, people have to make their minds up.
Yeah, I understand everything what you're just saying. I mean, look, I've been on planning a long time. There's a lot of people here that have been on planning a long time. What you're stating there, I mean, we have to be realistic at how close we are to London. Now, because we're so close to London, that has an effect on house prices. That's a fact. That's not the fault of us councillors or this council. Now, everything you're saying there, every council, you name me a council that has filled its obligations on Greenbelt on housing, doesn't have issues with rough sleeping, doesn't have a council list. Everyone does, and I actually think we're an incredibly lenient planning committee. You saw last month how lenient we're willing to be. But there's no getting away from the fact that not only is this site on Greenbelt, it is covered by or surrounded by a 2.5 metre acoustic fence. This isn't just a bog standard fence, and with respect, I don't think it's something that necessarily you can cover. Obviously you can plant trees, you can cover it in shrubs, but the maintenance, it's simply, I'm not aware of an area. I mean, these are big, thick, fat acoustic fences. That's the whole point of them. They can't just, they're there to design to kill sound and to surround that little green lung in greys with a 2.5 metre acoustic fence. I could probably just about justify maybe building on it without the fence, but you can't get away from the fact that it needs to be there. So I understand everything you're saying, but it's not necessarily all our responsibility. All we can do is look at these and make the best judgment we can. The appeal that we've had come back from Baldwin this week was damning. You know, Greenbelt is precious. You know, this is right next to Chadwell. If you build on here, we've got another application, I think it's been called in for probably a few weeks' time, which is right next to this. Where's the difference between Chadwell and Grays? The whole point of Greenbelt is to differentiate towns if possible. If that goes ahead and this goes ahead, they're connected. The only thing that's going to separate them is a road. It's simply on the Greenbelt. As I said, if you need to be able to justify it, and I can't justify it. And with that acoustic fence is simply not viable in my opinion. But as I said, I get what you're saying. Steve wanted to come in and Councillor Vesh and Councillor Byrne and then Councillor Lawrence.
Thanks, Chair. Something else that just came to mind, and I absolutely understand what Councillor Rice is saying. I appreciate that some of those issues exist, but the thing that I think we can't lose sight of is, first of all, this is outline planning, so we don't know what is going to end up. If we were to approve it, we have no idea what's going to end up on it. The applicant's saying it will be 35% affordable. How many times have we sat here and then 2 years or 3 years down the road, having actually established the principle, they've done nothing. They don't build on it. And then they come back and they want to put another 30, 40, 50% houses on it because a viability study says it's no longer viable. And then you don't get your 35% affordable housing. That ends up going down to 5 or 10 or maybe none. And we've heard all of these horror stories in the last 5 years. And the Section 106 stuff, all of a sudden, well, yeah, but we can't really afford that because it's not viable. And this goes on and on and on. So the issue you've got is exactly what Matt was saying, is it's about the principle of building on it. Because as soon as you've established that principle, your Section 106 is your affordable housing, all that, frankly, goes out the window. Because as far as they're concerned, they've got the first bit, and then they'll just keep coming back and coming back. And how many times have we listened to the same, an application on the same site, and each time it's got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's always the affordability. And as I've said time and time again, the affordability is simple. We end up picking up the can for it and losing out as an authority. But the reality is the applicant's paying too much for the site in the first place. And if they were paying less for the site, then it might be more viable. But all of a sudden, the buck always seems to get pushed in the council's direction. It never gets pushed back to the developer and said, well, hard luck. That's it. That's your problem. That's what you committed to do. You need to renegotiate the price of the land. But we don't do that. And that's, so we're still going back to the initial real problem is it's greenbelt, it shouldn't be built on. But the actual reality of all the rest of this is pure speculation, since if it's granted, you have no idea what's going to end up on there. And the one thing I can guarantee you is it won't look anything like the current proposal. Chuck in a couple of viability statements over the next 5 years, you've got something entirely different. That's my view anyway.
Okay, no, thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for those points. Okay, that's a pleasure.
Thank you, Chair. Totally agree with both Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Rice that one of the biggest problems we've got in this borough is the number of people who can't find a home, can't find the right home. I totally get it. Like them, I am regularly dealing with people who are on the wrong end of that. I don't think this particular small parcel of land is the answer. Assuming that we got the full 35% of social housing, that's 27 houses, I think we are at some point going to have the big debate and the big discussion, and we are going to have to build on Greenbelt. But it's going to have to be, when we actually pick that fight, it's going to have to be worth it. We're probably going to have to go big or go home, because it's got to actually make a dent. This doesn't. This is not the place to have the fight.
Yep, very good points. I mean, ultimately, yeah. It could get put in a local plan in a few years' time, this particular site. I'd be more comfortable then. I mean, if it was in the plan, then maybe that would be even more workable. Right, Councillor Byrne and Lawrence, I think.
Yeah, with Councillor Rice on this one, but homes for people that haven't got homes. If we build this, they still haven't got homes. They're not free. So our affordable housing is still unaffordable housing. So the only way you're going to move in is safe and social housing, and they're given away. So the people, it's not homes for people that haven't got homes, because they're still not going to have homes. So I can't get my head around that one.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you. I listened to Steve and Gary and Councillor Rice and everyone, and we all agree basically on a lot of these principles. None of us want to build on Greenbelt. I certainly don't want to build on Greenbelt. I still don't really agree about the acoustic fencing, because, like I say, I really have looked into this. It is my life as well. Perhaps I do need to look at this site again. I don't know, but I was comparing it to when you go from the roundabout going down into Grays or down Trafford 100. How they're built along there. They're built on both sides of the roads along there. And as for we're saying this is part of Greenbelt and we shouldn't build on it, this is in the middle of a road. It's not this field isn't stopping one area from joining another. It's in the middle of a road. So I can't see it as stopping, our building there isn't going to join up that part of the area to Chadwell, because it's in the middle of what's already there. So they're the opinions what I'm coming across, which I don't know. Perhaps I need to go and look at it again. I just don't know. But I don't really agree with Steve, although a lot of what he says is right. Because if we thought that way, we wouldn't be doing any building, would we? It's up to us councillors, what are here, and the officers to make sure that they do keep their word when they come back, and that we do watch what they're doing. And this is just preliminary. So for him to say, oh, whatever's here, we're not going to get anyway, it doesn't matter, because it's just to say that they can build there. And then when they come back again, then we say yes or no. So this is just saying a maybe. And as for the other officer over there, it says about the appeal, what come back. Yeah, that one did. Yeah, the officers won that one because they didn't want us to go with them. But how many times has it come back when we was right? That's never mentioned, is it? And we could solve the whole problem. Let's just build one big village out in the middle of nowhere, and then all the houses would be there and everyone would be safe. But we'd be up in arms then, because there'd be other areas, all Sitbalding, Fobbing and areas like that. They don't want their green spaces took away. So it's really tough decision. So to me, it was just a little bit of grass in the middle of a main road, which was a lot bigger than I thought. Yeah, there's a few cows on it, and I thought it would help the school. Palmers need help.
Chair, can I just jump in just on a point of a sort of legislative point, if you like. So Councillor Lawrence sort of inferred that this is a preliminary decision. Okay, so it's an application for outline planning permission. If you were to vote to go against the officer recommendation, you establish the principle. You're voting on the principle. Once you've established the principle, any reserved matters which follow have to be within the ambit of that principle. So this would be the substantive, in legal terms, it would be the substantive consent. So you are, if you were to go against the officer's recommendation, you are granting planning permission for that development. It's not a step on a journey, it's not indicative, it's not illustrative. The plans are, but the principle of 75 houses on a greenbelt site is established. So I just want to make that point absolutely clear. It's not an indication, you're establishing a principle if you vote to go against the recommendation.
Yeah, but my understanding is that that you could say that if we're going to give the go-ahead, you could build there. But obviously, all the problems surrounding it, they could be looked at and solved, couldn't they, if we all work together? I'm not saying do it. To be honest, I think I'd like to go and have a site visit, to be honest.
Okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, unfortunately, yeah, it does come down to sort of opinion. You sort of have to try and work out what can and cannot be overcome. I know you said about the acoustic sound, you can cover it in trees and shrubs. I'm not saying that's wrong. I mean, I have an opinion that actually it's a little bit more difficult than that in terms of maintenance, etc. You know, if a resident doesn't want to maintain it, then they don't have to. It's unlikely that it's unlikely that the developer would commit to that and or actually deliver on it. So, okay, right. So obviously we've debated this for quite long now. I've heard from pretty much everyone. Well, really, I mean, there is a recommendation on the. I mean, unless anyone suggests a site visit, and that's seconded. There is a recommendation which is for refusal. That's 9.1 on page 135. Also, I mean, obviously you've heard my opinion, so I would like to recommend that. Is that seconded? Councillor Byrne, okay. So on page 135, that's application 19/01373/OUT. There's recommendation 9.1 for refusal. All those in favour of refusal, please raise your hands. Okay. And all those against? Okay. That's been defeated. Yep, you got it. Excellent. Okay, so then it's over to yourselves to come up with an alternative recommendation.
Could one of these special circumstances be to get for helping the schools and education and get teachers into the area?
No, Chair. I mean, to my mind, you have to make a decision on the factors which have been promoted by the applicant, and the applicant hasn't offered any links with schools or with the college. So I would suggest to you that wouldn't be something you could reasonably rely on as a benefit in the balance of whether very special circumstances exist.
As Ross?
Yes. Well, on page 133, we talk about delivering a sufficient supply of homes, and we say no wait, but it must be a moderate wait there at least. because you know that you are delivering homes, a supply of homes. The importance to greenbelt purposes, very limited way. You talk about achieving sustainable development, very limited way. Well, that's got to be substantial. Making effective use of land, again, that says no way. Well, that's got to be moderate. And you start to build a picture. I mean, I still think where we are on this is we're departing from a green belt because, one, we don't have a housing supply over 5 years, and those are facts. Two, we do have a housing council house list of over 10 years, people waiting for homes. So, you know, I think that can be afforded substantial weight. And I think when the applicant talks about providing the true affordable nature of these homes, that has got to come into it. And I would say that we're starting to look at, regards to the local GP surgeries, there are GP surgeries in the local area. The applicant is willing to provide a substantial 106. It's my belief that, you know, we start to come up with those reasons. I mean, the Prime Minister only announced the other day he wants shovel-ready projects, and this is one. It can be done. It can be done quickly. So you have the employment issue through construction. You have a 5-year supply, which we haven't got. Then you look at our 10-year waiting list on the council. We must provide with that some weight. And then we follow, obviously, the applicant's appeal to us. And I think for those reasons, you know, we should allow this to go. Now, if you need any more, obviously the officers must tell us, you know.
Okay, Lee, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. So just referring members to the Constitution. So Constitution states that relevant section 7.2, if the planning committee seeks to make a decision contrary to the planning officer's recommendation, the following will apply. The mover of the motion should clearly specify or write down the motion, including the reasons for departing from the officer's recommendation, which has just been given, and the planning officer should be given the opportunity to explain the implications of what's being proposed. So what I have is 5-year housing supply, housing list, affordable housing contribution, shovel-ready projects, employment through construction, and that's the case that's been put forward. Clearly, my professional view is that that doesn't address the reasons for refusal. We would need to take the item away and come back with an implication report of making a decision contrary to recommendation, and for these reasons, Chair. Okay. Yeah, if that's been put forward, if that's what's been proposed, you probably would need a second.
Okay, excellent. So Councillor Rice has recommended approval for those grounds. Is that seconded? And that's seconded by Councillor Shinnick. So all those in favour of approval, that's application reference 19/01373/OUT. Please raise your hands. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so what will happen now is obviously that will go away. The officers will do their report, and they will report back to us at the next planning committee. And obviously that will have to go through one final vote. All right, excellent. So it's just past 9 o'clock. We've got 3 more items on the agenda. Obviously slightly smaller in scale. Shouldn't be too long, I don't think. Let's go.
Yeah, just before we jump on that one, Lee read out a list of arguments which members were relying on. can I just be absolutely clear, because I picked up something slightly different. I don't want any confusion. So we had supply of homes, including affordable houses. You were putting limited weight on the site's contribution to Greenbelt purposes. Did I pick up that? You felt that weight should be ascribed to its contribution towards sustainable development. We had the waiting list. I think Lee referred to the Section 106 contributions. The fact that you consider it to be a shovel-ready project, and construction jobs or employment during the construction phase. I think, is that everything? I don't want to miss anything for between us. I think we've got everything. Right, thank you. Sorry, it's just for clarification.
Excellent, thank you. Well, yeah, if it's relevant to the application call.
If we're talking shovel ready, I mean, do we need to go to the marshes on for our site visit? Because that's shovel ready, or just because that's shovel ready flat field? Do we need to go for a site visit?
Well, obviously we've already, that's coming back to us soon after the site visit. So yeah, no, we can discuss that on the night. Excellent, thank you. All right, brilliant. So that takes us on to item 12. And that's another one of yours, Matt. That's the 19/01824/TBC Landing Garage Depot Parade. Thank you.
Okay, there we are. Before I start, there's one housekeeping item. So on page 139 of the agenda, you've got the description of the proposal, and it's on the agenda. It's described as conversion of existing garages. We've agreed with the applicant that the wording should actually read conversion and part extension, so because there are some works for extension as well as the conversion. So that has been agreed with the applicant. So that's just a point of clarity and housekeeping. So if I just jump straight into the presentation. So there's an aerial picture of the site, and the site comprises, and apologies for the quality of that particular drawing, I'm trying to work out myself, but basically there's a redundant garage block roughly in a position about there, close to a local parade, so there's a small shopping parade, to the eastern side of Brentwood Road within Chadwell. And the proposal, so that's zoomed in, that's the block of garages. So you've got the retail parade off there to the north, just on the edge of the screen, and also to the west there. And that particular unit there, which is sort of joins the garage block, it's an estate agent or property letting company, I think, in the moment. So we're talking about a site here which contains two parallel blocks of garages. And the proposal before you basically is to convert them and part extend them, as I've just said, to two-bedroom dwellings, and they are specifically aimed at older occupiers. So in terms of the actual conversion itself, so the comparison of what's there at the moment in the two rectangular shapes there and there, so it's a conversion to two-bedroom dwellings, car parking space for each, and a small shared courtyard area. In terms of elevational treatments, so that's that image there, which I'm highlighting, would be the internal courtyard view, if you like. So the part extension is basically increasing the ridge height so that you can get a slope down there and a reasonable headroom inside. And then the end elevations, which would be sort of facing north and south, would be those two there. And that elevation on the right hand side would be the external facing elevation, if you like, of the two blocks. So a few pictures. So that's taken from the south, so you can clearly make out the two existing garage blocks. They're not used. A couple of them are in a slightly sorry state, shall we say. The existing point of access there. So simple conversion with an increasing height, with the roof falling back to front if you're looking at that particular image. That's taken from the side road, so that's the road to the east, Longhouse Road, again looking at the garage block. Further round to the north there looking southwest. So it's that particular garage block there. That's the estate agent I mentioned, which is not part of the site, though physically adjoins the garage block. Taken from the northwest looking southeast side, it's the other garage block there. Again, that's the estate agents, which isn't part of the site, though, as I said, physically attached. The shopping parade is literally to the right and behind where that picture is taken from. So it's a small pedestrianised area, as you'd expect with any small local parade. I think there might be a couple more. So that's looking east. That's the rear elevation, if you like, of one of the blocks. And that's the final one. Again, showing the two blocks there in comparison with the existing 16 dwellings on Longhouse Road, and also dwellings to the right-hand side there. So that's the south as well. I think there's an indicative, yes, that's an indicative image. That's not taken from the site as it will be, if you like. That's taken from a similar development elsewhere in the country. So that gives you an indication of the style of materials, etc. This would be similar. So you've got a mix of what you've got there, timber cladding, and you've got some facing render and grey window frames. So quite modern in appearance. So in terms of the issues before you, the site has no local plan allocation, and the application proposes new housing within the urban area. As you can see, it's close to facilities, close to shops, etc. And it's NPPF compliant in those terms. It is effective use of land within the built-up area. So there are no planning objections to the principle of it. In terms of design, it largely reuses the existing footprint. There is some increase in height, but it is acceptable in the context. So there are no particular design precedents or strong design keys, if you like, which would influence the design there. So an increase in height on its merits would be considered acceptable. It is quite an innovative design. It's for change. It's not demolition and rebuild. It's reusing what's there, converting it. It's well separated from existing residents. You can make out in that picture. So there are no implications for residential amenity of existing occupiers. In terms of the new dwelling, it's fairly limited in terms of amenity space. So in that layout plan there, there's a small courtyard. I mean, that would be fairly private, but it's quite tight in terms of space. However, in the wider area, you have open space on the western side of Brentwood Road near Heath Lane, I think it is, within probably about a 5-minute walk. So there's relatively easy access to larger areas of open space. There would be no, because of the design, that dimension there is fairly tight, but because of the way these particular units have been designed, there wouldn't be significant opportunities for interlooking between the two properties. And in terms of car parking, well, there's no loss of existing because those garages simply aren't used, and there would be one space for each of the new dwellings. And as I said, they are aimed at more elderly occupiers, and that would be secured by conditions. So wrapping all that up, no policy implications, no design implications, acceptable in terms of amenity and car parking, so therefore recommended for approval subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Fantastic. Okay, on to questions. No, okay. And we have no speakers. That's all right. Debate or questions? Debate, go on. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Rice, and I'd really like some of these built in marble, please, in South Ockenden in Bellis, I know considerably amount of elderly people that live in 3-bedroom houses what are really desperate to move into something like this. That way it would help everybody because they'd be willing to give up a 3-bedroom house for a family to let someone else move in. It would move the cycle round and round, so I think it's a fantastic idea. There's lots of garages in Ockenden if you want to come along. We would really appreciate some.
Excellent. Yeah, no. Yeah, I wasn't so sure on this one. Obviously, it's a recommendation of approval. Obviously, you've helped. I know Defo Parade quite well. Used to hang around there quite a lot. I'm not sure if the location is brilliant, but maybe it's better there now than what it used to be. But ultimately, this is obviously a recommendation of approval. You seem very keen on it, so I'm happy to recommend approval. I don't think anyone else has anything else to say. Okay, so on page 145, we have a vote to approve. Councillor Rice, did you want to recommend? Councillor Fletcher, seconded. All those in favour of the Defo Parade Land and Garages, please raise your hand. Excellent, that's unanimous. 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, yeah, brilliant. Okay. Excellent, so that's agenda item 12 approved, and that's Matt finished for this evening. That then takes us to the last 2 items, which Nadia will be handling. And we'll go first to Marby J's, found on pages 101 to 110. That's 20/00048/FUL. And when you're ready, Nadia, obviously you're going to have to get settled. Please present.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. Thank you. I will keep this as brief as possible because I'm sure you're all just as warm as I am. This application relates to Marvy Jade, which is land to the rear of 150-152 London Road, and it's actually in Grays. So it's a residential area. The site, the yard, was originally part of 152 and 150's overall site, but some years ago, and there is, a commercial use and activity that's been evident on the site. Looking at council records over recent years, the site is bordered by residential properties. That's in a good area of the site actually. So you can see the site there. If you, I can't quite use. There we go. There. If you see, there's a yard area behind 150 and 152. It's immediately north of there. On the site, there are some small historic structures, and a garage, and another single-storey building. There is a small area of informal hard surfacing, and it's in that area there where the containers have been located. As I say, the site is bordered by residential properties to the north, east and west, and indeed those above the shops on London Road also. The containers there's 2 of them on site, and they're particularly visible from Parker Road. The application has been submitted following enforcement investigations and complaints, and some images of the site here for you. And I can show you this is the site looking from Parker Road. I can show you the containers there, immediately fronting the access on Parker Road, and you can see the residential properties behind it. And they're looking from the other side of the road. So there are no land use objections to the siting of the containers to be used for storage on site. But by virtue of their utilitarian appearance and the materials for for the containers. They're considered harmful to visual amenity and to the character of the street scene. You know, structures of this type would not be considered to be permanent. They're not of a design or appearance that we'd want to encourage in the borough, and consequently they're considered to be contrary to policy, CSTP 22, and recommended for refusal on page 109 of your agenda. Just as a reminder, there is also one other housekeeping item I wanted to flag up. On that same page, the reason for refusal is, there's a typo actually, it refers to CSTP 23. It should actually state CSTP 22, as that is the policy that's referred to throughout the whole report, and it actually should be quoted also in the reason for refusal. But other than that, the application is recommended for refusal with enforcement action to follow, hopefully early next week, in regard to the removal of the containers from site. Happy to take any questions.
Excellent, thank you, Nadia. Yeah, I was just after, where are we in terms of back gardens and smells? I mean, is it just in particular smells, or could it be something like a compost heap? I mean, ultimately, you would imagine that you should be able to enjoy your back garden without, obviously, certainly a smell of dry fish. I mean, is that the same in terms of compost heaps, etc.? Or is that slightly different? Please advise.
Thank you, Chair. You're right to ask this question. So the containers were, the use of containers for the storage of dried fish was submitted as an enforcement complaint to planning, but there have also been separate complaints to environmental health on the grounds of odour from the containers on site. This application, I must stress, is in relation to the storage of electrical materials, not dry fish. However, there is considered to be a nuisance caused from odours on site, and environmental health served an odour abatement notice in late April, which ran until 23rd of May, I believe I stated in the report. And there have been concerns on site throughout, and I know the ward councillors and local residents have been concerned. From a planning perspective, the use is storage. It's the siting of the containers that is the issue here, not the land use. And from a planning perspective, they're considered to be harmful to the appearance of the street scene, and really, matters associated with statutory nuisance relating to odour fall outside the planning system.
Okay, thank you. We do have a statement of objection. Do we have any further questions? No, okay. And that's a statement of objection from Tony Fisher, the ward councillor. Wendy, would you be so kind as to read that out? Thank you.
I'm writing on behalf of Councillor Poffer, Kerry and myself to object to the planning application regarding Marby Jade site. We have been in contact with residents living adjacent to the site of the proposed application who have voiced their concerns in no uncertain terms due to the current usage of the site to store fish and the extremely unpleasant odour this causes. You will see from the report that the site is currently the subject of an abatement order action we have called for and fully endorse. The retrospective application is for the storage of electrical goods. Again, with reference to the report, it shows no evidence of the appropriate WEEE regulations being met. We also feel that with the site being in a residential area, it is totally inappropriate to place this type of operation here, as it will cause continual disruption to nearby residents' lives. We urge the committee to refuse this application in line with officers' recommendations.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so with that, we'll move into debate. Would anyone like to start? Steve Taylor.
It's actually, I should have done it in questions, Nadia, but just out of interest, am I right in assuming that at the top of Parker Road is a school? You don't need to go back to it. Just that there is a school there, isn't there? It's an infant school or a junior school, I think, primary school. Because Parker Road is a very busy road because of the school, isn't it?
Yes.
So having somewhere there where stuff's going to get delivered and picked up and so on, I can't imagine it's going to ease that problem at all. It's only going to exacerbate it.
If I may, Chair, you can't quite see it on the aerial, but it is at the very top of Parker Road. There are no highway objections in this sense, and there isn't an argument that there's any intensification of activity on the site. It's purely that the site, you can see the containers, and it's not very attractive or appropriate in the street scene, you know, surrounded by residential properties. But I take your point.
Thanks.
Councillor Lawrence, thank you.
Could I just ask a quick question? The owners of the business, is it a hair salon or a barber's? What do those, where does it belong to? What shop along there?
The application site doesn't actually include the retail unit on 152. If we go back to the red line plan, it's actually the area you can just see there. It's the area north of and to the rear of 150 and 152 London Road. Originally, historically, that whole area would have been the rear of both properties, of both retail premises. But at some point, looking at the aerials, probably in the late 1990s, early 2000s, this yard area was sold off and separated. You've got an original garage relating to garage and stores for the retail unit, but the ownership was separated and split over many years ago.
Correct me if I'm wrong, didn't Harris's coaches used to be down that road somewhere years ago, along that little park when they used to drive in? Is that correct?
I'm not aware that they were. The site has been known as Marvy Jade for over a decade.
Oh, I'm talking about early 80s.
Okay. I don't know off the top of my head. The planning history doesn't show that it was on that particular site. It may have been further elsewhere in Parker Road.
I can imagine there's quite a lot of flies there.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think obviously that if you're going to store that type of product, really containers are not ideal. I mean, obviously there are storage containers, but you know, you could easily build probably a purpose bricks storage unit, which would probably help. I mean, ideally, it's not really an ideal place for smells for dry fish. I mean, back gardens are incredibly important, certainly in a residential area, and it's important that people can enjoy their front gardens, their back gardens, even if they've got a window open, sort of odour free. So it's just simply not the location. I would support potentially some form of purpose-built storage, but again, that would have to have restrictions in terms of what's stored there. I think it's a pretty straightforward officer recommendation for refusal, which is what I'll be supporting. Unless anyone's got anything else to say, I will recommend that. Okay, anyone else wants to speak? Yeah, find it in a minute. I'm there already. I've missed out a sticky note, that's what it is. 109, recommendation 8.1. I'll recommend that. Anyone seconded? Councillor Fletcher. Okay, all those in favour of refusal, please raise your hands. Excellent. Okay, that looks to be unanimous across the committee. Which takes us on to our last item on the agenda. That will also be covered by Nadia, and that's the Riverside Business Centre in Thurrock Road, Tilbury, found on pages 149 to 172. 19/01837. Nadia, if you'd be so kind as to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the last item on the agenda for this evening. And I'll promise to keep it as brief as possible. So the proposal relates to the expansion of the Riverside Business Centre, located at the east side of Fort Road in Tilbury. So in the aerial photograph there, it's the triangular site there where you can see the L-shaped building and the car park to the rear, Fort Road running north-south in the picture, and the logistics park, the Fortress Distribution Park located immediately around the site, and the Maritime Transport Vehicle Depot also there. The site is in a high-risk flood zone and near heritage assets, with the nearby World's End pub to just the orange mark there on the aerial, with the Tilbury Fort beyond to the east. The site is also of interest to landscape and ecology matters, with interested lands here associated with common lizards and other invertebrates. There is a ditch network surrounding the site and a small area of scrubland immediately east of the site. The proposal seeks to provide 20 business units in a single-storey rectangular shaped building just there on the image in front of you, which would sit behind the L-shaped business centre on the site. The uses proposed within the business centre would be B1C, B2 and B8 uses. The proposal is part of the Council's growth agenda for enterprise units and includes the provision of a £2.36 million local growth fund by the South East Local Enterprise Partnership, which is driving the scheme forward with the Council. There's a general floor area showing the layout of the relatively small enterprise units. They would include a small mezzanine floor area within the single-storey structure. But it's relatively low level in height. The building would be a modern design with a shallow pitch roof and parapet, which would be clad in naturally coloured horizontal timber cladding, with dark grey metal framed windows and clear glass. I have a nifty visual of the materials used at a similar building to give you an idea of what the structure could look like. The building would be located behind, as I say, the existing business centre. Here, that's the best visual really for you for showing that. And it includes the expansion, as I say, of the car parking provision across to the east of the site, which is the narrowest part of the triangle, and providing an additional 47 parking spaces on site, which would take the total spaces to 145 overall. There would be no loss of parking on the site during the construction phase, and I can show you some layouts of the construction phase here. So that is the early construction phase, where the grey area shown on the plan in front of you relates to the construction compound as the works begin, and the second phase when that moves within the site and the car parking is rearranged for a temporary period. But the overall layout would be akin to that. This dark area, darker green strip running along the southern boundary of the triangle, relates to a provision of an invertebrates area that will be created for any invertebrates that would be on the site, and there are no adverse impacts relating to flood risk, amenity, heritage, landscape ecology, or any other highways impacts or design in relation to the proposal, subject to conditions. And I do have some other images if you want to see what the site looks like generally, but the application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, fantastic. No, obviously a very exciting site. If there's no questions, I'll go straight to speaker statement. Okay. Questions, all right, brilliant. Okay, so this is a Craig Austin, and there's a statement of objection here. And he's from M Sport Wheels Business. Wendy, would you like to read out the report? Thank you.
Please accept this statement as an objection to the current plans on behalf of M Sport Wheels Limited. We currently occupy 2 warehouses at this location. We object to the current plans on the basis there is no consideration for current tenants, and the impact of both construction and completed development will impact our day-to-day business. Thurrock Council has on several occasions since 2016 advised tenants of the intention to build new units, and to date haven't been able to give reasonable responses to our original concerns, which we have briefly summarised. Construction. The proposed boundaries of the construction site will mean our larger delivery/collection vehicles won't be able to safely turn to enter and exit the park. We raised this in 2016 on the original application and invited the council and the previous contractors to a future delivery to see how their plans worked operationally. This offer wasn't taken up. During loading/unloading of larger trucks, the delivery vehicle will block the single track access to 89 of the 102 temporary parking spaces. Loading vehicles typically takes 10 to 15 minutes, whilst unloading takes 3 to 4 hours. This is currently not an issue as there are multiple entry points to the car parking spaces in its current layout. With reference to the current construction plans, our vehicles fill the full width of the access road from the entrance of Warehouse 6 to the edge of the construction site. Once the project is complete, there is insufficient room for vehicles to manoeuvre safely. Previous swept path analysis have now been amended to show the larger vehicles, but no consideration has been made for stationary vehicles being unloaded/loaded. The recently published documents now indicate and advise a single driving lane around the park, which is achievable, but only when no other deliveries are taking place. The analysis shows no room for vehicles to pass, and as with the construction phase, our delivery vehicles will block the single driving track. The highlighted route of travel also presumes that vehicles parked in the bays are small passenger cars and fit within the boundary of the space when several tenants have long wheelbase vehicles that would cause an obstruction. From the original correspondence advising the intention to build, Thurrock Council and contractors have to date not been able to provide reasonable solutions to issues raised by current tenants. Several businesses here, including ourselves, have daily deliveries and collections, and with the current level of traffic/parking, we have on many occasions had to identify drivers who have parked outside of the bay to get the vehicle moved just to allow access for our trucks. This is due to the volume of cars already on site and have brought this to the management's attention previously. The council's current proposed plans will make this location inoperable for our business.
Okay, Wendy, thank you very much for that. Nadia, obviously the statement of objection here raises a lot of issues in terms of access. Have you had time to digest that statement and look through the issues and weigh up on balance where you've come to? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we had sight of the objection from the Speaker, and I've discussed it with the Council's highway officers in relation to the concerns raised. The highway officers are content that adequate manoeuvring can be made within the site, both during the final, for the final development as shown on that plan in front of you there, and also in the construction phase. So that's the early construction phase there, where it's actually the existing car park with additional parking spaces, and the second phase where spaces are displaced around the site, but it is still considered by our highways officers that there is adequate parking and manoeuvring available, and subject to conditions, and condition 16 on page thank you. There we are. I was looking at the wrong tab. Yeah, condition 16 on page 168. 68 actually addresses parking layout and subject to conditions. So we want to make sure that there is adequate access and turning space and visibility displays to address all issues relating to the proposal. And as I say, there are no highway objections in relation to the proposal subject to those conditions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, obviously that always makes it difficult when you have a difference of opinion, and certainly a business in the local area. I think as councillors, obviously we have to take that balanced approach, and as chair, I'll always mind to support the officer's recommendation if it has been investigated. I'll bring in Councillor Rice to debate this further. Thank you.
Well, I was going to say, Chair, it's an exciting proposal. 20 new business units will give us a boost. It's employment again, and it's to be commended, Chair, and well done to the officers.
Excellent, thank you very much, Councillor Fletcher.
Chair, yeah, just addressing this point about the objection and the he said, she said nature of whether there is or isn't room for turning. What reassures me is that particular condition number 16. We are in effect saying, we're not saying that the objector is wrong, we're saying we'll actually make sure that we can demonstrate that there is access. That for me says, all right, we're listening to your objection, we're dealing with it.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, all right then. All right, with that, there is a recommendation on 161. That's 8.1 to approve. Would anyone like to recommend that? Councillor Lawrence, seconded. Councillor Rice. Okay, so all those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay, and that's unanimous across the committee. So we can say 19/01837/TBC is has been approved, and that's of course the Riverside Business Centre for the road. Okay, so in guidelines with conditions, what I'll do, we'll close the meeting now. That's 21:42. I'll just call your names out one by one. Wendy, if you're happy with that, for the councillors to leave, we'll take it from there. So Steve, are you right to make way? Yeah, good. Councillor Fletcher, are you right to leave when you're ready? Just separately. That's the that is the one. Yes. What I'll do, I'll call your name out, and then within reason, just make a note. Yes, you can. Yes, Steve, Councillor Rice, when you're ready. Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Salmons. Obviously, if you just keep that 2-metre distance, that would be very welcome. Yes, Shinnick's. I've not called out Councillor Shinnick yet. Yeah. Okay, excellent. And Councillor Shinnick and Byrne, when you're ready, you can leave. Obviously, just keep those 2-metre distances. Thank you. Brilliant meeting. Cheers.